the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 276, Progress of the Tiger Translator. Henry couldn't quite describe the impression he made on Charlize Theron after their first meeting. He could sense she was wary. Perhaps it had something to do with her upbringing. He wondered if the things he'd learned before crossing over had happened in this world as well. Perhaps once the actress had achieved success, she'd be able to share those things without hesitation. But at this point, it was like a landmine. Anyone who stepped on it would be prepared to be killed. Of course, Henry couldn't afford to step on it and ask about her father's situation. So, as a Hollywood veteran, he offered some advice and said goodbye. Perhaps this would be the only time he'd meet this actress face to face. Walking the streets of Los Angeles, a city with the highest concentration of Hollywood stars, spotting celebrities wasn't exactly news or a major event. But engaging in conversation or conducting in-depth research was much more challenging. Did anyone really think those celebrities were just prostitutes or gigolos, available to anyone? Henry had assumed he'd have to wait a few years, when the actress would shine on the big screen, before he'd have the chance to see her again. It would only be in a movie, not in person. Unexpectedly, just 2 days later, he received a call. "Hello, is Mr. Henry Brown here?" "Yes, I am." A slightly hesitant voice came over the line. Slowly, with a hint of uncertainty, he said, "This is Charlize Theron. Do you remember me?" Miss Theron, of course I remember you. I was wondering how I could help you." "Well, you're the author, no, the translator of Love from Another Culture, and I'm a fan. I was wondering if I could get you to sign your book." "Sure. Where and when should we meet?" "Can we meet at the same restaurant we met last time?" "At noon." "Well, I have something else I want to ask you." It wasn't a dinner date, nor was it a treat. Apparently, the girl was hungry. Henry didn't object and said, "Okay. Today?" "Yes, it's this afternoon." "In that case, since the time is right, I'll treat you to a meal." "Sorry, I'm always hungry, so I need to eat when the time comes." "Okay, thank you, then we'll see you then." "Yeah, see you then." After hanging up the phone, Henry looked at the tiger cub Katie, who was circling around his feet. Well, okay, she's not little anymore. Animals grow very quickly, and basically after a year, they're considered mature, and their size is certainly no problem. Katie couldn't even be a year old, but she already weighed 480 pounds. If Henry hadn't replaced the cat climbing frame with a metal one, it would have crushed the wooden one. She was acting like this because today was the day she was supposed to go out into the wild to get some fresh food. The ability to run wild in the wild, rather than being cooped up in a small house, was certainly quite attractive to an animal, especially a tiger. However, since they had a meeting with a living person, Katie's outing would have to be postponed for one day. This wasn't a case of forgetting one's love for a woman. So Henry stroked the tiger's head and said, "Little one, eat some refrigerated fresh meat. I'll take you out tomorrow." "Roar, no." This was the voice coming from the translator's speakers. Henry grasped the tiger's cheeks with both hands, forcing Katie to look at him. Then, his eyes gleaming red, he asked again seriously, "Going out tomorrow?" "Okay." "Roar, okay." "Good girl, Henry." His eyes back to normal, stroked the tiger's head again. Actually, Katie couldn't understand overly complex language. Henry's translator, besides translating the tiger's thoughts and roars into simple human language, also had the function of translating human language back into tiger language. As it accumulated more data and its functions improved, Katie gradually understood the tiger language transmitted by the translator and was able to have simple communication with Henry. However, since tigers think differently from humans, Katie currently only understood the meaning of a small number of words. She couldn't even understand a sentence, let alone a complete set of commands. Henry couldn't tell whether this was true tiger language, or just a stress response like a puppy or kittens, after long training, to commands like sit and hold hands, perhaps, trained by the translator. This was simply Katie's adaptation. The interactions between them had long since transcended the boundaries of wild tigers. As for Katie's current feed, Henry contacted a butcher and had them deliver freshly slaughtered meat daily. The payment was made daily. To ensure nutritional balance, the meats delivered were rotated regularly. For example, beef today, lamb tomorrow, pork the day after tomorrow. Horse meat was occasionally available, but it was rare. Feeding a tiger isn't cheap, no wonder so few people can afford it. For nutritional reasons, Henry even considered developing canned tiger food, similar to cat food. However, it probably wouldn't sell well, especially in zoos, so he decided against it. Watching Katie chew on raw meat was pleasant, though the smell of feces was fishy and strong. Henry has remodeled Katie's private toilet several times. Since he couldn't take Katie out for an appointment today, Henry had to prepare Katie's food bowl in advance. Besides the storage area, which keeps food fresh and allows for regular feeding, it's also crucially important to be sturdy. Ever since Katie discovered this little creature could produce its own meat, guess how many times she's destroyed the bowl? The original plastic one was a whim, a simple, hasty decision. The first generation of bowls barely lasted a day, leaving Henry with only the remains when he returned home. Then came the second, made of sheet metal, but it also couldn't withstand the tiger's claws and was ripped to pieces. Then came the third, fourth, and nth generations. Katie even tore through the refrigerator after she saw Henry taking meat out. The refrigerator, like all the other furniture, is reinforced and tiger-proofed, but it still can't withstand deliberate vandalism. That's why Katie now relies on a butcher for daily food deliveries. Henry was so tempted to sneak off to Wakanda to get some vibranium and build Katie's own feeding bowl. It was a battle between her fangs and Earth's strongest metal. Who would win? He finally managed to secretly obtain the formula for the main armor plating used in tanks 30 years ago, and that's how he built Katie's feeding bowl. As for why they didn't use the latest armor plating formula, it was because composite materials were now used, unlike the pure metal plates of the past, which could be infinitely thickened. Composite armor was developed to counter various types of attack, offering various functions such as bulletproofing and heat resistance, while also being lightweight. But Henry was only dealing with the claws of a tiger. Ordinary steel would suffice, as composite materials are more susceptible to damage. After Henry placed Katie's lunch in the feeding bowl storage area, the tiger's attention shifted to something it couldn't bite or smash. The BB series core robots reduce maintenance and upgrade times, and the feeding bowl played a significant role. Scratching Katie's chin, Henry needed to kill some time before the appointed time. Chapter 277 Meet Again. Parking the car on the curb near the restaurant, Henry entered the restaurant close to his scheduled time. He wasn't late, nor was he too early. Charlize Theron had already arrived, happily chatting with a rather burly waitress who had nearly arrested her earlier. She clutched her own copy of Love from Another Culture. Could this be considered a case of acquaintance? As the waiting person entered, Charlize happily stood up and greeted them. "Henry, you're here first. Have you ordered?" Henry approached the table. "Not yet, I was waiting for you." After letting Charlize sit down first, Henry pulled out a chair and took his own seat. The waitress, with her professional demeanor, graciously presented the menu. Henry asked, "What would you like?" "The same as last time." "Yeah, that one was a bit large." "I'll just have the duck pie," Charlize said a little sheepishly. It seemed she hadn't been hungry since their meeting the day before. That was probably a good thing. Henry said, "Give me a duck dinner, peach cobbler, lamb chops, and a Caesar salad." "Thank you." Charlize looked surprised at the food, which was clearly not enough for one person. This was the girl who had promised to treat. If she had been the one to treat, she would have spent a week's worth of food in one meal. Facing the wide-eyed look, Henry smiled. "I have a big appetite. The steak you saw last time was the second round." That's the first time I've ever heard someone use the term second round for a meal. "Haha, you get used to it," Henry said, extending his hand. "Give it to me." Charlize was momentarily stunned by the question. Henry pointed to the book the girl was holding and said, "You want my autograph, don't you?" "Oh, yes, yes." Charlize hurriedly handed the book over. Henry, again using a fountain pen, signed a blank page at the bottom cover in cursive script and wrote a message. What was unique was that the message, wishing success in their careers, was written in Dutch. Although Afrikaans and Dutch are separated, the distinction is roughly the same as between American and British English. So Charlize Theron, a South African, could still understand it. She was simply surprised. Do you really know Dutch, or did you look it up for me? Of course it's for you, beautiful girl, Henry said affectionately. Then, with a smile, he said, isn't that a bit too much? Charlize Theron, with a complex expression, a mixture of joy and embarrassment, seemed to let down her guard and said, okay, what's the truth? Henry said in Dutch, my former boss, Audrey Hepburn's last life partner, Robert Wolders, is Dutch. I usually communicate with him in French or Dutch. Is there any difference between this and your Afrikaans? A little different, but I still understand what you're saying. For example, you say levenspartner, and we say Lewensmid. I think I understand why there's that difference, Charlize asked curiously. Oh, why do you think that is? Perhaps it's because modern Dutch has been heavily influenced by French. For example, the same word in French is partenaire defy, Dutch borrowed partner as its root. That's probably it, Charlize said, switching back to English. Henry also asked, how long have you been in America? A little over 2 years. Why do you ask? Because your accent isn't like Robert's. It's strongly Dutch, with a hint of French. Henry then imitated the Dutch actor's intonation and recited a line from an opera, making Charlize laugh. Did he really speak like that? Charlize asked. Yeah, integrating opera into everyday life. That's quite a talent, Henry teased, turning to ask, what about you? I've traveled to many African countries with Ms. Hepburn, but I've never been to South Africa. What's it like? The United Nations had arranged Ms. Hepburn's visit to South Africa before Henry became her assistant. There were no further plans after that, so Henry naturally missed the chance to visit that country. Charlize seemed reluctant to discuss her hometown, but she still replied, honestly, it's no different from any other African country. Apartheid created a society riddled with conflict. I grew up in Benoni, Transvaal, near the city of Johannesburg. My family lived on a farm, and the environment was wonderful. I often played barefoot in the dirt, like a boy. There were no Game Boys, no computers, and international sanctions at the time, so there were no concerts. This meant I had to find my own entertainment, like a typical country girl. So if you asked me what South Africa is like, I can't really tell you. I can only share the impression people have of it, even if it's a bit negative. The meal arrived, and the two ate and chatted. Henry asked, what happened next? Charlize replied, when I was 16, I left South Africa with my mother and went to Italy to work as a model. Although I lived in Milan, I spent that year traveling around Europe. After my modeling contract ended, we came to America. Mom lived in Miami, and I went to New York to attend the Joffrey Ballet School, Henry asked in surprise. The training center run by the Joffrey Ballet? They're famous, and the people who get in are not easy to get into. You're quite good, yet. If only my knee hadn't been injured, Charlize said dejectedly. Really? Oh, what a shame. Injuries during training mean you can't truly reach the top level. So-called talent isn't just about learning quickly, it also has a physical limit. If you hit that limit early in your training and suffer injuries, it's a lie to claim you'll achieve great things in the future. For many things, persistence alone isn't the only way to success. Yes, my teacher said the same thing, and she also advised me not to continue studying ballet. It was a terrible time, so you came to Hollywood to pursue your dreams, Charlize said, as if immersed in memories. Yes. My mother, who had returned to South Africa, came to New York to see me during that time. She told me, either you figure out what to do next, or come home. Because in South Africa, I can sulk as much as I want. Then I came to Los Angeles to try one last try, and my mother stayed in New York to support me. This was the last chance for both of us. If we failed again, we would have to go back to the farm in South Africa. The American dream, ahoha, Henry sighed. Embarrassed, Charlize Theron said shyly, really, why would I tell you such weird things? Please forget it all, okay, I forgot. But I have to say, sometimes it's good to say things out loud instead of keeping them bottled up. No. Please forget it completely. Don't give any advice. No problem. Well, I don't remember anything at all, Henry said, following the trend. Chapter 278 Request. Everyone's talking about me, but what about you? Were you born and raised in Los Angeles? Charlize asked. I traveled through time. If I told you, you'd be terrified. Henry said, Alaska is just as boring as you are. The only good thing is there are more snow activities. Skiing isn't just for fun, it's like a life skill, so, there's really nothing much to say about my childhood. It was a boring place, a boring life. I don't even want to think about those days. It felt like I was truly alive after coming to Los Angeles. There was no mention of the childhood before the time travel, and there was really nothing to mention. After growing up, we all became office workers, and experienced the childhood of strict fathers and kind mothers. What experiences can we be proud of? Perhaps because they had similar experiences, Charlize never mentioned father in her words, and Henry didn't even ask an extra question. When Henry didn't mention parents, Charlize would not deliberately ask. The two seemed to have a tacit understanding, and they selectively mentioned that period of time, and didn't ask about the part that was not mentioned. In the following conversation, Charlize talked about her experiences in Europe and New York. Of course, she picked some happy things to talk about. Henry talked about his experience of traveling around the world with Ms. Audrey Hepburn during his time as her assistant. Don't be fooled by the angelic appearance of the children in the public photos. Those undocumented moments saw many hilarious and heartbreaking incidents. The language barrier was the most common problem. It's impossible to expect every child in these impoverished countries, where even a proper education is often lacking, to speak fluent English. Overall, the lunch was a pleasant one. As long as he avoided making harsh remarks, Henry was quite the master at creating a good atmosphere, managing to keep Charlize amused. However, as the two finished their meal and sipped their coffee to digest it, Charlize Theron's hesitancy, her desire to speak something unnoticeable, became apparent. Henry smiled and said, "If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. Just remember, promises like giving you a multi-million-dollar lead role tomorrow are only meant for the genie, not me." "Well, my wish isn't that outlandish," Charlize said, her nerves calmed by the joke. "Yesterday I met a man who claimed to be a talent scout. His name is John Crosby. He did me a huge favor. He also said he wanted to discuss an agency contract with me, and we've arranged to meet this afternoon. I'm completely unfamiliar with Los Angeles, so I wonder if you could come with me." Henry agreed immediately. "Sure. Where are you meeting?" "What time?" "A cafe on Hollywood Boulevard, at 3 p.m. Nodding, Henry said, "Well, we still have some time. But before that, let me tell you about the Hollywood newcomer agency contract I know of. The initial contract is valid for 1 year, with renewals extending up to 3 years. Only big-name actors can easily fire their agents. Ordinary people have termination clauses, but they generally involve the agent's commission. The agent still has to pay the share of work negotiated and completed during your relationship, and they can't withhold this payment simply because the contract is terminated. As for compensation, generally there isn't any. This is unless the agent has invested something in you, such as training or acting lessons. Only if they've made an upfront investment can they demand compensation upon early termination. As for the commission percentage, the agent's commission cannot exceed 10%. Agents cannot participate in the production or enjoy the client's work, including partial enjoyment. This is stipulated by law, so that the agent can stand on the client's side, that is, you, rather than on the side of the investor, to avoid conflicts of interest. But you also have to know that although the law stipulates this, there are always ways to circumvent it. For example, the agent's commission is 10%, which is his remuneration, but if the agent also has business expenses, can these funds be claimed from the actor? Just like the investment, training and other expenses I mentioned earlier, these expenses will be paid by the actor under different names. This is also normal in the industry, so I can give you some unprofessional legal advice. As long as it's not a blatant trap contract, you have to consider whether you are willing to accept the other terms yourself. The most important point is that newcomers don't have much room for negotiation. So you said he did you a favor. Can you tell me about the situation? If it's just a favor you owe someone, perhaps the terms of the contract can be negotiated. But if it's more, you may have no choice but to agree, or to repay the favor and refuse. After thinking about it, Charlize decided to speak out. "Yesterday I received a check from my mother. But when I went to the bank to cash it, the bank refused it because it was out of state and I'm not a U.S. citizen. That money was life-saving money for me, so I argued with the bank teller. John Crosby happened to be behind me in the queue, and he helped me cash the check and gave me his business card, asking me to contact him." "Is that so?" Henry pondered. There is a time lag in the exchange of bank checks in the internal bill system. It is not uncommon in the United States to see bad checks that cannot be cashed due to insufficient account balances. If the bank cashes it at this time, no matter how high the discount rate and handling fees are set, it will still be a loss. Different states, different banking systems, and not being an American citizen do involve risks. So it is not news that Charlize Theron was rejected. Henry asked again, when Mr. Crosby cashed a check for you, he deducted the handling fees, right? Or did he give you the money according to the amount of the check? Everything was deducted. It's not the first time I've cashed a check. Of course I know there are fees. I won't take advantage of others like this. Well, then this is a personal favor, there is no debt issue. What Henry didn't say was that this favor could be big or small. Basically, the scout was betting his own credit that the check sent by Charlize's mother was not bad. If there was a problem with the check at that time, the bank would of course look for John Crosby, not Charlize Theron. Of course, there was money in the checking account, and the money could be cashed normally, so there was no big problem. But it was a favor after all. Looking at the clock on the wall of the restaurant, Henry said, "It's almost time, let's go meet the scout. Want to go with me in my car?" "Okay," Charlize nodded. Chapter 279 Scout. Henry and Charlize Theron arrived at the coffee shop they'd arranged to meet. It wasn't long before John Crosby entered. Charlize immediately stood up to greet him. "Mr. Crosby, this way." John Crosby spotted the man standing next to Charlize. He approached and greeted her, then asked, "Is this your boyfriend?" Henry extended his hand first, introducing himself. "Hello, I'm Henry Brown, a friend of Ms. Theron's. I've been in Hollywood for a while, and I'm here to give you some confidence." "Hello, Mr. Brown. I'm John Crosby, head of the Crosby Agency." "Which agency are you currently signed to?" John shook hands and then offered his business card. But his expression was a little strained, as if he were seeing someone getting in his way. It was a subtle expression, not overt, so it was hard to tell if he had any ill intentions. Henry, with remarkable self-control, accepted the card without a murmur. At the same time, he said, "Please take a seat. I'm only registered with the Screen Actors Guild, not with any agency." "Oh, then would you be interested in signing with us along with Ms. Theron?" John invited. Henry smiled and said, "I only played a few background roles a little over 2 years ago. At that time, some senior actors said I didn't have the looks to get a leading man. They could only get by with supporting roles. I wouldn't make a fortune, but I'd still be able to survive. So now I have other jobs and am not so enthusiastic about the acting career. It's just that I'm less familiar with Ms. Theron, so I'm just here to help review the contract details." Henry didn't want to present himself as a Hollywood veteran. He couldn't compare to the middle-aged talent scout before him, and it would be easy for him to be caught lying. Instead, he just told the truth. It wasn't like he was going to force the other party to use all his resources to promote a Hollywood rookie. As long as he let the other party know that he wasn't a complete newcomer, some inappropriate behavior would be moderated. I don't know how much of the subtext John understood, but at least his eyes softened a lot. He first asked the waiter for a cup of coffee, then took out a document from his briefcase and placed it on the table. John said, "I talked to Charlize on the phone yesterday, and she can sign with my agency. The agency's business scope is very wide, ranging from movies and TV series to music videos and print models. With Charlize's conditions, I believe she can stand out in a very short time. Maybe we won't be able to play a movie role right away at the beginning. But she can go to acting school to hone her acting skills and work as a model to earn a living. We talked about you working as a model in Europe before. This job should be a piece of cake for you. It sounds like a smooth road ahead. But who among the talent scouts doesn't have the ability to speak eloquently?" Henry looked at the documents on the table with reservations and asked, "Is this a contract? Can I see it, please?" After signaling to Charlize and receiving her consent, Henry first took the agency contract and examined it. From the agency scope to the profit-sharing agreement, everything was perfectly legal and standard. However, the key point lay in the initial investment. The agency would cover Charlize Theron's acting school expenses. Given the upfront costs, the contract term and termination conditions were complex. The law stipulates that initial contracts are only valid for 1 year, with renewals limited to 3 years. However, this contract included a right of first refusal. As long as Charlize's profits within the year did not exceed a certain threshold, effectively covering the cost of acting school, Crosby Agency could request an extension of the contract. The termination conditions were the same. If she wanted to leave, she would have to repay the company's investment before she could leave cleanly. Furthermore, the specific amount was not specified, it would depend on the cost of acting school. This was only slightly better than simply asking someone to sign a blank contract. While such a contract presented potential risks for a complete newcomer without family resources, if the agency was serious about nurturing her, the terms would be reasonable. But the other documents Henry's X-ray eyes glimpsed in John's briefcase weren't so benign. One document stated that after signing, the agency would not only cover acting school expenses but also provide clothing, living expenses, and a luxury apartment for the women. Literally, every aspect was taken care of. However, the profit margin the agency had to earn within a year was so high that even the average office worker would be astonished. Failure to meet this target would effectively make the agency a slave from the second year onward, completely controlled by the massive debt. This left the girl with two options. One was to shoulder the enormous debt and work multiple jobs to repay it. The other was to continue enjoying the lifestyle she'd enjoyed in her first year, but still be under the agency's control. While some of the terms were stringent, every newcomer to Hollywood dreamed of a Julia Roberts-like rise from humble beginnings. So, as long as they fulfilled the contract, no matter how stringent the termination or breach of contract conditions were, it wouldn't matter. But by the time they faced reality, it was too late. Perhaps many of Hollywood's fallen women were created this way. How many people set out to make money in the shady industry? The unproduced contract revealed that Crosby Agency wasn't a good company. Henry's presence was the only reason John didn't produce the strictest slave contract. Even if he knew Crosby Agency had a dark side, it was only Henry's guess. He couldn't directly tell Charlize Theron that this guy was dangerous and that she should stay away. Nor could he produce any evidence. The contract in the other party's bag hadn't been produced. He couldn't say all men were rapists just because a man had a gun in his crotch. Perhaps they truly wanted to train their actress well. So Henry simply explained the terms of the contract to Charlize, one by one. He didn't deliberately exaggerate or add any emotional language. Finally, Henry said, "There's nothing to discuss in this contract. It's basically based on the Screen Actors Guild's temporary agency contract template, with a few extra clauses. The termination compensation is actually the company's initial subsidy for acting school. If you're willing to cover the full tuition, perhaps the termination compensation clause can be removed." John, who had been adding to the discussion from time to time, then said, "Charlize, if you're willing to pay your own tuition, then removing the compensation clause is fine. I see you're struggling financially, so I'm offering you this special help. Whether you accept it or not is up to you. But if you want to be a film actress, don't ever say you don't need acting school." The teacher I chose to work with is a renowned figure many big stars seek out. He's incredibly skilled in acting, and even more remarkable, he knows how to teach. Many well-known stars can act themselves, so they don't necessarily know how to teach. And more importantly, being able to take classes with him is like a calling card. If there's a director who places great emphasis on acting, your acting teacher will be your endorsement until you have a compelling film. Let me think. The actress, who hadn't yet made her film debut, stood at a crossroads in her life. Chapter 280 Another Favor. Ultimately, Charlize Theron signed a contract with a talent scout, Mr. John Crosby, and became his agent. However, Charlize chose to pay half of the acting school fees, which naturally reduced the termination compensation by half. In fact, she would have preferred to pay the full amount if she could. However, relying solely on her mother's support and her own part-time job to cover her living expenses and rent was already quite tight. Even half the cost of acting school was her limit. John also advised her to prepare some presentable clothes. She had to find a way to pay for her wardrobe herself. Charlize couldn't imagine paying the full cost of acting school and what kind of life she would have to lead. Fortunately, Charlize Theron didn't have American citizenship, making it difficult for her to apply for a credit card or a bank loan. Overspending and living in debt were out of her reach. If she had to borrow money, it was partly due to her pride and partly because of Henry's warning. While debts of gratitude are difficult to repay, financial debts are more likely to escalate into disputes and become legal constraints. Henry, of course, didn't offer any financial assistance. John Crosby's money was hot to the touch, but was Henry Brown's money also not a threat? From Charlize Theron's perspective, both were equally likely. At least for this young woman, she knew exactly where the line lay and wouldn't easily cross it. I thought the matter would end there. With her sense of boundaries, she wouldn't ask me out to dinner every other day, expecting me to pay. Who knew that the next day, I'd get another call from Charlize Theron. "Hello, Henry. This is Charlize Theron. Good day, Ms. Theron." "Oh, Henry, just call me Charlize." Calling me Miss Theron makes it sound like we're strangers, okay, Charlize? You just signed a contract with Mr. Crosby. Didn't he give you some instructions? When we talked yesterday, Mr. Crosby seemed to have made a lot of arrangements for your future, Charlize Theron said on the phone. Actually, that's why I'm calling, needing your help. I'm still living in a motel, and John wants me to find a place to stay in the next 2 days. Even if I can't move right away, I need a semi-permanent address. He gave me some advice, but I still wanted to call you and see if you have any trusted rental agents. I see. Please write this down, okay? Give me a moment. The sound of someone frantically searching for paper and pen came from the other end of the line. Okay, go ahead. Henry gave a number and said, the rental agent's name is Fabio Romano. I found the house I live in now through him. Just tell him you're Giovanni from the photo studio and that you were introduced to us by Henry from old Gary's office. He'll know about us. I think the properties he has are pretty friendly to people new to Hollywood. You can make an appointment with him yourself. Oh, thanks, Henry. You've been a real help. Do you want me to help you look for an apartment? Henry said this more as a courtesy than anything else. Charlize, on the other end of the line, answered quickly. She asked, is this really necessary? What kind of person is this Mr. Romano? An enthusiastic Italian guy with a good tongue? Ah, I know him. I've been traveling around Europe for a whole year with an Italian modeling agency. I'm immune to Italian enthusiasm. Haha, now I believe you can handle him. If he's rude in any way, remember to tell me and I'll help you kick his ass. I've been wanting to do that for a long time, but I just couldn't find a good excuse. Do I have to suffer the consequences first? You can also just tell him what you said. When he's spitting sweet words, give him the middle finger for me. I'd be very grateful. Okay, I know what to do, Charlize said helplessly on the phone. Okay. If you're looking for an apartment today, you'll be very busy. I won't keep you away. See you next time. Thank you, Henry. You're welcome. We should help each other. After hanging up the phone, Henry whistled, feeling inexplicably good. At this moment, Katie suddenly pounced from behind. Roar, breakfast. Fuck, Katie, you're a tiger. Oh, no, a tabby. Someone who doesn't know you would think you were a pig. You're 3 minutes late feeding me, and you're not normal. Roar, forgetting friends when you see a beautiful woman. Fuck, who taught you such a complicated sentence? Tell me. Today, here's your food. Catching the tiger's paw trying to ruffle his hair, Henry grabbed Katie by the scruff of the neck and tossed her onto the steel cat climbing frame. Katie effortlessly twisted in midair, landing on all fours like a nimble cat. She persevered and hopped down again, determined to keep pestering Henry until he finished breakfast. Henry had no choice but to retrieve the warm beef, freshly delivered by the butcher that morning, from the refrigerator and toss a whole piece into Katie's feeding bowl. Tigers don't want to be cooked. Even if cooked and raw food were placed side by side, it would always choose the raw first. Warm meat preceded those that had been refrigerated for a few days, and then those that had been frozen. The best food, of course, was the kind that had been served to Katie freshly broken, before the blood had even been drained. Henry didn't even bother to complain about this carnivore's dietary preferences. But as long as it wasn't staring out the window all day drooling at the bipeds roaming the streets, Henry felt a little tired. No big deal. Raising a pet was like serving an ancestor, and Henry was starting to regret it. If it weren't for that tiger penis that had died of natural causes, Henry wouldn't have gone to all this trouble. Katie, who was eating her meat, suddenly felt a chill down her spine, a shiver running down her body. She looked worriedly at the kindly smiling Kryptonian. Oh, tiger spine and marrow are also valuable, they can't let them get cold. The friendly Kryptonian wanted to step forward and pet the tiger's head, a gesture of affection and reassure the little tiger that it wouldn't worry too much. Katie panicked. What should she do if she was being targeted by a Kryptonian biped? But no other tiger had taught her. After playing with Katie for a while, Henry heard a peculiar high-pitched sound. It was the Black Clinic's call bell ringing again. Another person shot, seeking medical attention so early in the morning. Henry complained about this unfortunate fellow, not knowing whether he was a black man or a Mexican, while he found the tinker's clothes and changed into them. Chapter 281 Another Daily Life in Los Angeles. The Black Clinic was busy today. It all started with a 3-month summer break for semester-based universities. The board students threw parties, naturally attracting drug dealers. Then, 2 gangs, each claiming the party venue as their own, engaged in a late-night brawl to compete for market share. Now, anyone alive and connected was being sent to the tinkerer. After all, as long as they weren't killed instantly, they were guaranteed survival. As for why the late-night brawl dragged on until morning to send the injured, it's obviously because these guys are being stingy, trying to save money and treating their own gang members' injuries themselves. The price the tinkerer charges for a life is already incredibly low for many street-age individuals. Hospitals would not only rip them off but also call the police, making them incomparable to the tinkerer's service. But for the black guys and Mexicans who constantly wish to hold the tinkerer at gunpoint and command him to treat them for free in their rap-like voices, even the cheapest price is still money. Of course, they preferred free service. After a few failed attempts, these street thugs naturally developed their own standards for who to send for medical treatment and who didn't. It was just a gunshot wound. Digging out the bullet, stopping the bleeding, no big deal. That's what everyone does. If they could handle the wound themselves, they certainly wouldn't send it to the tinker for bandaging. If they couldn't, if the injury was too severe, and if they had no connections within the gang, then they'd die, and no one would grieve for them. If it was someone's brother or relative whose injuries couldn't be treated by their own men, and who couldn't die, they'd have no choice but to send them to the tinker. It seemed like a sifting through, as today, on this important day, the tinker's black clinic had already seen over 10 groups of injured patients. That's nearly 1,000 in a single day. You can imagine how many people were injured. By the time Henry returned to his rental, it was already afternoon. Fortunately, he'd prepared Katie's lunch before leaving, otherwise the house would be in turmoil. I went to the grocery store and bought a bunch of fruits and vegetables. One of the downsides of running a black market clinic is that while there's income, the money collected is all illicit and needs to be laundered, making it difficult to deposit into a bank. So, Henry has to find purchases that can be paid with cash, slowly spending the illicit funds. This also makes Henry's food quite extravagant. As a major agricultural exporter, the United States boasts a rich variety of agricultural and animal husbandry products. But not all of them are green and safe. For example, genetically modified foods, often criticized for their improved quality, yield, and pest resistance, are genetically modified primarily to improve quality, yield, and disease and pest resistance. Claims of increased nutritional value aren't straightforwardly deceptive, they're just statistical math. So-called quality refers solely to the appearance of the crop. Simply put, it means it looks bigger, tastes better, and sells better. In reality, its nutritional value may actually be lower than that of native varieties. Then, a very American tactic is to get a bunch of research institutes to endorse the product, proclaiming its goodness. Then, they push for legislation to legalize it, set standards, and force global acceptance. Then they dump it all over the world, onto the tables of the poor. At least the 4 major grain traders, ABCD, are smart enough not to directly add chemicals to food. Anything that works quickly will be exposed quickly, making it easier to link them. The American approach is to know the product is flawed, but rely on the endorsement and certification of powerful research institutions to prevent anyone from finding a causal link, making it impossible to definitively say the product is flawed. Since they can't prove it's flawed, it's legal and can be sold. So they sell it all over the world. In short, even within the United States, the market is still flooded with agricultural products engineered with American technology, finding their way onto the tables of low-income families. Truly environmentally friendly, pollution-free, green food is expensive. The worst part is, even if you pay too much, it's not guaranteed to be green and pollution-free. Even eating healthy is a challenge for average-income blue-collar or white-collar workers. If Henry didn't have some illegal income, he wouldn't be able to afford even the barely passable agricultural and livestock products. And that's not even considering the truly premium, specialized products. Even if one could rely on his Kryptonian nose for bargains, it wasn't always possible to find 1 or 2 less rotten apples among a pile of rotten apples. So when it was time to pay more, one still had to buy. At least Henry could guarantee that what he bought wasn't some inferior, shoddy product. Just as Henry was returning home with a paper bag of fruits and vegetables, old Gary was standing on the street chatting with someone. Seeing the man get out of his car, he immediately called out, "Henry, you're back. Good day, Gary. I heard this is your friend," old Gary said, pointing at him. The person he was talking to turned around, and it was indeed a familiar face. Henry smiled and greeted, "Charles, Fabio. You guys are here looking for an apartment too, Henry, hey, little Henry. Charlize looked surprised. Fabio made an even more exaggerated expression, looking like he wanted to rush over for a big hug. But Henry, holding the large paper bag, completely blocked Fabio's path from the front, which made him give up. However, he stepped forward and took a large tomato from Henry's paper bag, biting into it, the juices gushing out of it. Henry, unfazed, also pulled 2 apples from the bag, giving one to old Gary and the other to Charlize Theron. He said, "Looks like you've been running around all day. Did you have a good lunch?" "Yes, Mr. Romano and I went to Ms. Cesaria's restaurant," Henry said in Italian. "Ah, delicious Italian food. I've tried to ask Cesaria for their pesto recipe several times, but Cesaria always says she'd rather sleep with me than give me the recipe. I don't know whether to be happy or disappointed." Fabio laughed and said, "She's taking advantage of you by sleeping with you. You're taking advantage of her by giving me the recipe. So, what do you think a shrewd Italian woman would choose?" Having lived in Milan, Italy, and worked for an Italian company, Charlize Theron was no stranger to the language. While not as fluent as the other two, she understood most of what was said. Not to be outdone, she also resorted to Italian in response to the two men's dirty talk, stumbling over her words. "Perhaps you should just go with Celia a few times and trade the pesto recipe." Fabio was equally amused, grinning. "Charlize is a good idea. Henry, have you considered it? I'll help you negotiate with Celia." Henry rolled his eyes at everyone. Chapter 282, Future Movie Queen in Search of a House. "You two were looking for an apartment, and you found yourself here at Gary's?" Henry asked, changing the subject. Fabio answered first, "As a single woman, I couldn't recommend her to some overly crowded neighborhood. And the rents for the ones that were suitable were a bit high. Charlize wanted to look a bit more, so I brought her to Gary's to try her luck. You know, you can't just move in here if you want to. You have to get Gary's approval." Everyone's attention was focused on old Gary, who wore tight trousers and eyeshadow, his t-shirt tied at the waist, revealing his midriff. The coquettish landlord hesitated for a moment before saying, "Henry, your friend is great. If she wants to move in, I can show her some vacant rooms. I also have rooms for share houses, and the rent is much cheaper." "Really, Gary? That's great," Charlize said happily. Old Gary said, "Young girl, you earned this all on your own. Do you know how many people, seeing me like this, would reveal an expression of open disgust? Of course, I don't like that look of prey either. What I mean by screening is simply finding tenants who can tolerate my personality. I finally found myself, and I have the right to choose those who won't despise me." Charlize agreed, "Of course, Gary, it's your right. Just being yourself is better than being those violent assholes," old Gary said happily. "Aha, good girl, I knew I'd like you. My top floor is made up of small suites. Although you have to climb stairs, it's quite private. If you want a cheaper rent, I have a whole house with shared rooms. One of them is occupied by girls. The vacant room belongs to female college students who just graduated and moved out this year. You can check it out." Charlize smiled and said, "Gary, then show me everything." "Okay, wait a minute, I'll get the key." With that, old Gary walked into his room. Henry saw this and said, "Then you guys go ahead and do your work. I also have to put the things I bought in the refrigerator." He didn't want to follow and interfere with other people's decision-making. If Charlize Theron made an irrational decision about her wallet out of personal feelings, guess who this South African beauty would blame in the future? If it was difficult to refuse because of personal feelings, that would be even more of a sin. "Okay, see you later, see you later." After saying goodbye to Charlize and Fabio, Henry went straight up to the 3rd floor, returned to his room, and organized his refrigerator. He refrigerated the fruits and vegetables he had bought, and placed the ones that didn't need refrigeration in an iron cage. Tigers generally don't eat fruit, but they can absorb the water in it if they can't find another water source. Following the principle that if a biped can eat it, Katie would try it, the unprotected fruit she bought did indeed get a lot of spoilage. So Henry had no choice but to get an iron cage to keep the fruit in. As for why he didn't keep the tiger in, it's all just that Katie wouldn't necessarily insist on destroying the cage to eat the fruit, but she would definitely insist on destroying her own cage. Meanwhile, Charlize, walking behind Gary, asked, "Gary, which floor does Henry live on?" "Henry, he lives in the corner room on the 3rd floor." Charlize asked again, "Live alone?" "Yes, he does." "Oh, and he has a pet. Do you allow pets here?" "I thought most landlords didn't like tenants having pets. In principle, they're not allowed. But as long as they don't yell in the middle of the night or let their pets out to poop and urinate in the hallway and not clean up after themselves, I'll be flexible. But if they make a mistake, that flexibility is gone. Yeah, Gary said. Henry lives in a one-bedroom apartment. It's smaller than an average house, but larger than a studio. I usually rent to people with a lot of personal belongings, like studio owners, painters, sculptors, and the like. Oh, is Henry like that? Old Gary thought for a moment and said, probably not. But he's put a lot of stuff in the house. I'm worried about how to restore it when he leaves. You really shouldn't indulge him too much. He's a very cunning person. A real ripoff, Charlize asked. No, Henry always bribes people with delicious food. I've been fed so much that I don't know how to refuse him. Well, that's a sly fellow. Ha, ha, that's true. He is a sly little fellow. Old Gary and Fabio exchanged a laugh. Don't think Henry and Fabio's connection only extended to their initial arrival in Los Angeles 4 years ago, when they rented a house. In fact, since then, he'd frequently contacted Giovanni for specialized computer parts, keeping in constant contact with the Italians. It was this close relationship that allowed Fabio and Gary to freely tease the absent person behind his back. Charlize Theron, however, was quite restrained in her questions about Henry, as if she didn't care at all, her primary focus remaining on the house. But as they spoke, she couldn't help but gravitate towards the man, wondering what old Gary and Fabio had to say about Henry. Such subtle thoughts were impossible to conceal for two men over 50. However, they refrained from rashly offering assistance, as they weren't entirely certain if the target was the man. In their 20s, even if they weren't particularly well off, what man wouldn't chase after a woman? They really didn't think they were 20. But in Gary and Fabio's eyes, Henry's life was a simple one. He'd never had a girlfriend, never brought a woman home for a night out, and rarely went to bars or dance clubs. His idols were beauties from Hollywood's golden age, and not content with their on-screen beauty, he went so far as to become their assistants. In other words, the closest people to Henry were women in their 60s and 70s. Yet, with his eloquence, not only could he win the hearts of women, but even many men would find it hard to truly dislike him. Tony Stark, who said that? With that piercing tongue unleashed, who wouldn't want to strangle him on the spot? Even if it wasn't possible, he could still seduce the biggest stars in Hollywood with just that mouth. Could he even seduce a few decent girls? Finally, Henry even kept a tiger at home. Not only were thieves afraid to come in, but even normal people wouldn't dare enter his house, let alone the women. Old Gary even introduced his ex-wife's relative, a beautiful young college student. Even if that didn't win the man over, it made people question his sexual orientation, or even his integrity. So, regarding Charlize's feelings, they didn't know whether to encourage or hinder their relationship. They could only let things take their course. Chapter 283 New Neighbor. Charlize Theron moved into Gary's apartment building. She shared an apartment with two other girls, a common practice in major American cities. The bedroom was a private space, while the living room, kitchen, and bathroom were shared areas. As long as the rules of public and private life were clearly defined, living with strangers wasn't a problem. Her two new roommates were quite welcoming. One was a baker who dreamed of opening her own shop, and the other was a clerk at a trading company. Although the subletting arrangement, led by the landlord, Gary, meant that even if there were vacancies, the rent wouldn't increase due to fewer people sharing the bill. However, living expenses like utilities were still shared equally among the tenants. For these newcomers to society, the difference between having 3 full rooms and sharing utilities with 1 or 2 missing roommates was quite significant. So, of course, they welcomed Charlize Theron's move into the vacant room. Henry once again played the role of driver, driving his Cadillac to Charlize Theron's motel and taking her luggage back to her apartment. Charlize Theron's luggage wasn't much, a few changes of clothes and some daily necessities. It fit easily into a suitcase and a few plastic bags, eliminating the need for a moving company or truck. During the ride, the woman recounted her experiences moving around the world, from South Africa to Italy, from Italy to the United States, and from coast to coast. Each move was like the beginning of a new life, filled with hope for the future. Henry listened obediently. It felt different from the experience of traveling the world with Audrey Hepburn. When they visited those places, they knew they were just passing through. They arrived today and would leave in a few days. But Charlize Theron approached each place with the intention of putting down roots and starting a new life. While this was a positive and proactive attitude, one could also tell from her words that the girl was struggling to let go of the past. Since it was quite late, Henry, using the excuses of being hungry and having a housewarming party, treated the girl to dinner. After dinner, the two returned to their apartment building. Henry helped carry the suitcase up to the 4th floor, Charlize's apartment, and even delivered it to her door. The two roommates, who had already finished get-off work, happened to be sitting in the living room and met Henry as he carried the luggage upstairs. The girls asked curiously, "Charlize, is that your boyfriend?" The shy girl quickly replied, "No, just a good friend." One of them seemed to recognize Henry and exclaimed, "Ah, are you the one on the 3rd floor?" Henry smiled and said, "Yes, I live on the 3rd floor." Henry Brown. "Good evening, ladies. Nice to meet you." After carrying the luggage inside, Henry retreated and said, "If you need any help, you can call me or come to the 3rd floor. I'll be back now, okay? Good night." "Good night." Henry closed the door, yawned, and walked back to his room. No wonder this girl is so successful. During their conversation today, Charlize Theron was like a shot of chicken blood, spewing positive energy and inspiring eloquence. If such a positive person doesn't step up, allowing a loser like herself to do so, then there's no point in the world. Seeing such a dazzling person, and knowing what she could achieve in the future, Henry felt like a vampire catching sight of the sun, almost melting under the glare. Not to mention the string of critical hits, which made me want to say something like, "I'm sorry for being such a loser, better go to bed early." Meanwhile, the other two girls were already grilling their new roommate, asking, "How do you know that guy? Is Henry famous around the building?" Charlize asked back. Something sour was brewing inside. The two girls exchanged glances and said, "Maybe he's not as famous as you think." "You haven't been to his house yet, have you?" Charlize nodded. "That's right. Once you're there, you'll know why he's famous." "What do you mean?" Charlize was puzzled. "Did you know he has a pet?" "Yes. Gary said it's a tabby cat." "Isn't it? Haha, a tabby cat. Anyway, don't get scared when you see it." "What? Is Henry's pet a bad one? It's not one of those little girls who calls him tabby cat, is it?" Charlize asked worriedly. "Well, you really are suited to Hollywood. You have such a rich imagination." "Yeah. But it's not the situation you're worried about. Without the little girl, he lives alone." "Ah, what's the matter with you? You arouse people's curiosity, but don't give answers." Charlize, who couldn't stand the riddle man, couldn't help complaining. The older baker who aspired to open a shop said earnestly, "It's not that I don't want to tell you, but I don't know how to make you believe it. Unless you see it with your own eyes." The clerk girl said, "If you don't worry, it's too late. It's like you've been delivered to the door. You can bring a few cans of beer and visit his house to thank him, and then you can see it. Don't worry, I don't think you can stay there overnight. The beer in the refrigerator is my support for you. Feel free to take it." Although she felt like a kitten was scratching her heart, Charlize Theron gave up the idea of looking for answers right now. On the one hand, it was so late, and she still wanted to see the other party's pet. What if she was dragged to see mushrooms? After all, that did sound like an excuse to send a cunt 1,000 miles away. She was not yet prepared to do that. On the other hand, Charlize Theron also needed to sort out her thoughts. The changes in the past 2 days were too great and too fast. She had to think carefully about what to do next. She must not be blinded by some good things and mistakenly see the signs of bad things. After a few jokes with the two new roommates, she took her things back to the room and began to organize and arrange them. One of the good things about old Gary's house was that it was fully equipped with some basic furniture. So there was a bed, a table and a wardrobe in the room. Although the sheets and bedding were not new, old Gary said that they were all washed and clean. Charlize, who was short of money, could not afford to buy a new set for herself. Fortunately, the bed didn't smell strange, instead carrying a faint, refreshing scent of detergent. So the claim of cleanliness was probably believable. He hung his few clothes in the closet, and placed his underwear in a drawer. At the very bottom of the suitcase sat a small desk photo frame. Inside was a photo of Charlize as a child, on a farm, with her mother. It was one of the few times she smiled. The feeling of unreality that had always been like a bubble finally crystallized. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284 Camping Day. As one of the future icons of independent women, Charlize Theron certainly wouldn't move into a new home and then, just because she knew someone next door, she'd go to their house every day to eat. She had her own life, wanted to pursue her dreams, and needed to find a way to support them. Besides finding a sugar daddy, she had to use every moment of her time wisely, keeping herself busy and earning enough to cover her expenses. Although John Crosby didn't sign a strict agency contract, he still fulfilled his responsibilities and sent Charlize to acting school to prepare for future performances. The cost of acting school still had to be raised. While the agency would cover half, as stipulated in the contract, Charlize Theron had to earn the remaining half through sheer effort. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Meanwhile, Henry wasn't just a neighbor of the future actress, so he kept paying his dues. He remembered that this was the Marvel Universe. He wasn't just any ordinary person. When enemies wanted to attack them, would they show mercy and spare those around them? While he probably didn't have any mortal enemies right now, or any enemies who would go to any lengths to harm him, there was always the possibility that someone might be wrong-headed and determined to fight him to the death. As he told Charlize, there weren't really any strictly good or bad guys in Hollywood. Even someone who was once a sheep could turn into a wolf when their weaknesses were exposed. This principle also applied to society. Henry needed to be wary not only of disreputable organizations, but also of official organizations and those who claimed to be fighting for justice. Therefore, Henry was hesitant about creating a vulnerability by dating an ordinary person. This was a major reason he kept his distance from everyone. As for finding a girlfriend who could protect herself, those were easy to find. And there was no guarantee that if he found one, he could still hook up with her and turn her into his own. Never mind. Whatever happened, I'd make the best of it. As long as I didn't actively pursue anything, no one could tempt me into a trap. As planned, Henry packed his camping gear and prepared to take Katie out for a bite to eat in the wild. This should have been done a long time ago, but it was delayed a few days to help Charlize Theron. Constantly heading to the secret lab in Sheephole Valley wasn't a good idea, as the nearby wildlife had been wiped out. The wilderness's ecosystem wouldn't recover quickly. So Henry planned to drive Katie into the forest. Tigers are a perfect match in the forest. The ecosystem is richer, meaning there's more food. Forests in the United States are largely public land. Since the passage of the Forest Conservation Act in 1891, the State Forestry Administration and the Bureau of Land Management have managed 251 million acres of federal land, all of which are restricted to development. Consequently, the United States relies heavily on imports for its timber consumption. While deforestation in other countries is fine, it's important to protect our own environment. While development is restricted in the forest, that doesn't prohibit people from going there and having fun. Oh, no, camping. As long as you don't commit illegal activities like arson, illegal logging, or poaching, the rest is your own responsibility. Hunting in California requires a hunting license. Having a license comes with a set of rules to follow, including hunting methods, tools, and hunting areas. Regulations vary by region, sometimes conflicting with each other. Animals are categorized as protected species and game animals. The latter range from turtle doves and hares to wild deer and black bears. Game animals can be hunted freely as long as the conditions are met. However, certain animals may have hunting seasons and individual quotas, meaning not all hunting is unrestricted. Despite the common wisdom that hunting without detection counts, Henry dutifully obtained a hunting license and a firearms permit, and prepared a modern commercially available hunting bow. This way, even if rangers saw him hunting small animals, he wouldn't be in trouble. Otherwise, he would face fines and confiscation, which would include both the game and the hunting gear, essentially a loss of both the money and the goods. He didn't carry a gun because, for Henry, using a bow or a gun made no difference. In fact, using these weapons would limit his lethality. But this was just for fun, and to get Katie some food, so there was no need for any fancy hunting gear. If it weren't for the fact that going out with just a slingshot was ridiculous and difficult to explain to others how he hunted, Henry would have preferred to keep things simple. Camping gear, including tents, sleeping bags, pots and pans, was readily available for purchase. Henry didn't insist on making everything himself, whatever worked was fine. Besides, unless you buy something with special features, it's a bit of a waste. Ordinary items aren't that expensive. Henry wasn't looking for a luxurious camping lifestyle or a Bear Grylls-style wilderness survival adventure. He just wanted to get out into the woods and relax. So, he did whatever was easiest. And the most important part was putting a collar on Katie. A collar is a clear marker to distinguish between domestic and wild animals. Otherwise, if someone saw a tiger in the wild, explaining that it was his own without a collar would be a real hassle. But with a collar, the explanation was much easier. The leash was also custom-made. It was made of finger-thick iron bars bent into rings and strung together into a chain, not just a normal rope. Henry wasn't worried about not being able to hold Katie, but he was worried about the normal rope snapping. Once everything was ready, Henry loaded the car like a normal person. Just as he'd put his tent and backpack in the trunk, he heard a sweet, soft voice beside him. "Henry, are you going camping?" Turning around, he saw a beautiful blonde in an ivory dress, carrying a small white handbag, and a large straw hat. Noticing Henry's gaze, she smiled sweetly and waved her hand. 1, 2, 3. "Ah, Bobby. Long time no see." Barbara Morse puffed up her cheeks in dissatisfaction, pouted, and said, "Have you forgotten me? I said that I would come to play with you during the holidays." "No, of course I didn't forget. It's just that I thought you would find a college boy, like a star quarterback, or an athlete as your boyfriend. Those college students are much better than me, and I haven't become a big star." Henry said it bluntly, and he was just about to grab the person's collar and ask, "What are your intentions with me?" Chapter 285 College Students on Summer Vacation. Barbara wasn't the shy type. She leaned right over to Henry, holding his arm tightly, pressing against his indescribable softness. She said, "School's full of nerds, or guys who got in specially recruited and had steroids injected into their brains. What's the point of them? If you want to catch a sucker, you'll have to go to Harvard or Yale. Look at all that gear. Are you going camping? That's perfect. Take me with you." Henry didn't pull his hand away, not because he wanted to enjoy the moment a little longer, but because he was pondering a question with a strange expression on his face. "This girl, do you dare? I have a companion. Do you want to see him before you consider it?" "Companion?" Barbara released her hand, flicking her hair, which shimmered golden in the sunlight. She said proudly, "Who would refuse a girl like me?" Henry replied honestly, "Well, he wouldn't refuse you. After all, it can be used as emergency food. But I can't say whether you hold the same opinion." Seeing that the girl was about to come close again, Henry stretched out his hand to block her and said, "Anyway, I'll take it down first." Then he turned around and went back into the apartment building. After watching the target leave, Barbara remembered to say hello to old Gary, who was sitting on a lounge chair basking in the sun not far away. "Hi, Gary, I'm here to play. Is the university on vacation?" asked old Gary. "Yeah, it's on vacation at the end of May. I will graduate in a year, and there are some things I have to prepare first. I'm so busy that I only have time to come and play now." She was just so excited, but when she saw old Gary's charming look and the word lead from Henry's mouth, she remembered something very important. Could it be that Henry wanted to take his pet out camping? Sure enough, when Henry walked out of the door of the stairwell of the apartment building again, he came with a huge tiger with a yellow background and black stripes, which probably weighed no less than 500 pounds, led by a chain. Barbara was immediately frightened when she saw this, and she retreated 2 or 3 steps in fright. Henry did not get too close, but stopped at a certain distance, grabbed Katie in his arms, raised his front paws and waved, saying, "Hello, Bobby, I'm Katie. Nice to meet you." This is like treating a tiger as a kitten or a puppy and speaking in an anthropomorphic way. And the tiger's disgusted expression is also unique. It raised its head and tried to lean back, just not wanting to look people in the eye. "Hello, Katie." Barbara cautiously raised her hand to greet. Henry didn't care about the little girl's feelings, and took Katie and drove her to the back seat. At the same time, he locked the chain to the buckle installed in the car. Take such an aggressive pet out, don't say how well behaved it is at home and how good it is to you. When you go out, no one knows where the trigger point is, and whether it will stimulate the pet's desire to attack. Not to mention it's a tiger. If someone is hurt, not to mention whether you will regret it, the subsequent compensation issue will also be troublesome. Even if no one is hurt, a beast like a tiger will be regarded as a threat just by walking on the street. What's even funnier is that this concern is extremely reasonable. In order to minimize the concerns of others and eliminate the possibility of injuries, Katie must be tied up properly. Henry didn't want to end up having to kill Katie. It's true that California has not yet enacted laws to ban the keeping of wild animals, but animals hurting people is another matter. After making sure Katie was securely tied, Henry opened both backseat windows. The chains were long enough for Katie to lean out either window, but not long enough for her to jump out. Henry then said to Barbara, who had retreated a distance, "I'm mainly taking the tabby out." "Do you want to come with me, Tabby?" Barbara said, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Are you sure? It's just a harmless little kitty. Who can be scared of it?" Henry said as he pulled the whiskers one by one. Katie shook her tiger head without giving any face, and bit the hand that was harming her sensitive whiskers, as if she was going to swallow the whole palm into her stomach. Then she turned her head to look at Henry, and they looked at each other affectionately. Katie even squinted her eyes. The tiger chewed a little, but failed to hurt the Kryptonian two-legged beast at all. Henry controlled his smile with veins on his forehead, opened the tiger's mouth casually, and pulled his hand out. He said as he wiped it, "It's just that sometimes my hands will be covered with saliva, which is a bit troublesome to wipe." Barbara was so frightened by the scene that she shook her head. What a joke, she was just an ordinary person, without bulletproof skin, and of course not protected from tiger bites. This bite would only leave some saliva on your hand. On my hand, I could prepare to install a prosthetic limb. If this meeting was just for the mission, perhaps Barbara Morse would have backed off. But the courage that inexplicably arose in her heart made her put on a forced smile and said, "If I get to know Katie well, she shouldn't bite me, right?" "Well, do tigers have the habit of not biting acquaintances?" Henry was thinking. But he still said, "If you have nothing else to do and want to go camping with me, it's not impossible. Katie won't bite anyone casually. I'm just afraid that most people won't believe it and will be afraid of her." "But," Henry looked up and down at Barbara's outfit and said, "it's not convenient for you to walk in the wild wearing this. In fact, the clothes and straw hat are fine. The most important thing is the pair of pointed high heels on Barbara's feet. Whether it is a kick from the front or stepped on by the heels, the shoes have increased damage and critical hits, but they do not have the ability to increase travel." Henry planned to drive the car until it could not be driven anymore, then go deep into the forest and find a feng shui treasure land to camp. Although there was no preset destination, he had never thought of just finding a camping area. Barbara, unwilling to be abandoned, gritted her teeth and said, "Wait a minute," then she dragged her suitcase and walked towards old Gary. "Lend me the bathroom." She broke into old Gary's house. She looked so aggressive, as if Barbara would beat anyone to death if they said no. Old Gary just stared blankly the whole time, not daring to stop her. She was not much better than a quail. After a while, Barbara came out again, wearing a hot casual outfit. The hem of her light yellow t-shirt was tied at the bottom of her tube top, showing off most of her slender waist. The wide neckline exposed half of her shoulders and the suggestive thin straps. If the denim shorts were a few inches shorter, they might not cover anything. But now they just showed off her toned thighs, and combined with her tight, muscular calves, there was no doubt that she had the explosive power of a cheetah. Under her feet were a pair of Nike jogging shoes with a clear swoosh logo. With the support of Michael Jordan, this sports shoe brand is challenging the status of the traditional brand Adidas. Earlier this year, I was taken to Griffith Observatory for a scenic hike, and unexpectedly, I was invited on a 10-kilometer hike. Although the hike didn't happen, Barbara came prepared. "I'll be there for you, no matter where you go." Dressed in this cool outfit, she glared at the man before her, enjoying the admiring looks from everyone, including Henry and Gary. Chapter 286 Driving on the Road. Barbara, wearing a pair of sunglasses instead of the large straw hat, leaned against the car window in the passenger seat, enjoying the cool breeze that streamed in from the suburbs. Henry's Cadillac DeVille was nearly 30 years old, but he'd had the air conditioning serviced himself, so there were no issues with insufficient cooling or odors. But once he left the city, the breeze from the windows was more than enough to dispel the incoming summer heat, bringing a sense of relief. So no one bothered to use the car's air conditioning, instead enjoying the natural coolness. Katie's tiger head was also hanging on the other rear window, tongue half lolling out, trying to dispel the heat. Although the tiger head in the back seat had led to several police stops, it was important to emphasize that California currently has no ban on keeping wild animals. As long as they didn't harm anyone, the police had no right to interfere. Not to mention that the tiger was chained, so what additional measures did the police expect? The music blasting from the car's stereo was once again the rock music of Queen. Lead singer Freddie Mercury passed away in late 1991, but the band didn't disband. Not only did they continue to perform, they even continued to create. However, it's undeniable that their pinnacle lies in the moving music left behind by the Indian-American lead singer before his death from AIDS. Radio Gaga was playing, and both Henry and Barbara hummed along. Initially, Barbara was wary of Katie in the backseat, fearing the tiger behind her would claw her or bite off her headrest along with her head. Although the tiger was chained, the chain only prevented Katie from jumping out, not from escaping to the front seat. However, tigers raised on Kryptonian soil are not as aggressive as their wild counterparts. Following the principle of a good child is a good child, Katie's safe upbringing was a miracle. Even in a tiger world, she would be a true hero. You have to remember, Katie is just an ordinary tiger, one coveted by the Kryptonians for their penises and bones. From day one, her owner has been thinking about her tragic death. She's not Krypton, the Kryptonian dog crammed into an escape pod and transported to Earth with him. Krypton possesses powers comparable to Superman's, while Katie can't even meow. So how could she possibly be so irritable? Would she dare bark her fangs and claws at anyone she sees? In Katie's world, all Twi'leks look the same. The one next to her is terrifying, so she naturally assumes all Twi'leks are terrifying. Even if her tiger instincts still exist, she'll categorize those she can eat into one category and those she shouldn't mess with into another. As a tiger, Katie's mindset is as steady as an old dog, even more so than the Kryptonian Twi'leks who claim to live a life of seduce. Katie has no interest in the female Twi'lek who marinates herself with strange seasonings, and therefore has no desire to approach her. This is actually one of Henry's recent research findings. As Katie grew older, her furniture damage became increasingly severe. Even though everything, including computers and speakers, was protected by a protective barrier, Katie could only destroy the barrier, not the internal components. Henry was annoyed by the daily maintenance, not to mention the inconvenience of using them. His previous approach was simply to find stronger materials, making things harder and harder so Katie couldn't easily destroy them. But such behavior has its limits. He couldn't completely armor his home with tank-like armor. But when he brought Katie to the Yangdong Valley laboratory one day and noticed her actively avoiding certain irritating chemicals, Henry realized he was on the wrong track. It's well known that infants and toddlers between 4 months and 2 years old have an oral stage. They instinctively put anything they can get their hands on into their mouths. As a manufacturer of all ages game consoles, how did Nintendo, when designing the Switch, a portable game console, address the issue of small game cartridges being a target for infants and toddlers during this oral stage? A. Coat the outer layer of the game card with denatonium benzoate, a compound bittering agent known to be the bitterest known. Any child with a normal sense of taste would spit it out the moment it enters their mouth. It's impossible to hold or swallow it. Henry couldn't use scent to keep Katie away from things he didn't want her to destroy. Kryptonians have incredibly sensitive noses. A tiger can smell it, so Henry couldn't miss it. He didn't want to torture himself. So, following Nintendo's lead, he developed a bittering agent that was harmless to both animals and humans. This would deter Katie from biting, thus reducing her desire to destroy things. As long as Henry didn't lick the coated parts, he wouldn't be in harm's way. Denatonium benzoate is actually a good solution, but the downside is that it gets on the skin. If she touched it before eating, it would add a flavor to her meal, a bitterness so strong it would make her question her life. And if it had no scent at all, Katie would have to experiment with what she could and couldn't bite. This could easily be an overreaction, making the tiger cub afraid to touch anything after a couple of failed attempts. Therefore, the paint needed to have a subtle scent as a warning, but not too diffuse. Furthermore, the scent wouldn't bother Henry, a Kryptonian, and it needed to be sufficiently inert to prevent it from easily spreading. Given the inherent serendipity inherent in the creation of many new materials, Henry, lacking much experience in materials science, resorted to a crude method. He collected common perfumes and other strong-smelling substances and had Katie sniff them one by one. Then, based on the scents the tigers were repelled by, he searched for specific substances, whether chemically synthesized or mixed with other substances. This was like a chemistry test for Henry, exhausting his superhuman brain. He came up with a bunch of inexplicable ideas, essentially random fantasies. Ultimately, he combined bittering agents, alcohol, camphor, and chili extract to create Henry's tiger repellent paint. The faint, barely perceptible scent, even for a Kryptonian, only piqued Katie's curiosity, failing to repel the tigers unless she sniffed it closely. Even the experimental mice exhibited similar symptoms. However, upon ingesting the substance, they immediately began struggling madly, attempting to escape their cages. Subsequent physiological examinations of the mice revealed no immediate harm from the tiger repellent paint. All that remained was to observe the long-term effects. However, pending the long-term results, Henry semi-forced Katie to taste a little. 3 days of a dull life followed for the tiger cub. Out of curiosity, Henry tried a little himself. And then, for the first time since waking up in Alaska, Henry went 3 days without food, even going out into the sun to bask in the atmosphere. Krypton's keen sense of taste certainly contributed to this. Finally, his house finally shed its tank-like armored design, and Katie learned what she could and couldn't eat. However, there was a side effect. Katie subconsciously became disinclined to approach anyone wearing perfume. This was Barbara's current treatment. After all, during the development of the tiger repellent paint, Katie was often captured to smell its strange scents. This left a psychological scar on the little tiger. Regardless, this side effect was a pleasant surprise. It was a good thing Katie wouldn't pounce on people wearing perfume. It saved Henry the trouble of teaching her not to pounce on people. Although she didn't understand why the tiger disliked her, Barbara gradually let go of her fear and wariness of Katie and began to truly enjoy this unexpected journey. Chapter 287 Walking. California Highway 2, a highway that traverses the Angeles National Forest, left the highway at a certain point and entered the forest. They drove until the car could go no further, then stopped. Barbara, following Henry out of the car, placed her trunk on the hood and packed her camping gear into a small backpack. Of course, she couldn't drag a trunk around in the forest. Besides, not everything inside would be needed. The unused items could be placed in Henry's car. Henry had already packed his belongings before getting in the car, so he simply shouldered his gear and backpack. Once everything was ready, Henry opened the back door and led Katie down. Because Barbara was there, Henry didn't remove Katie's leash, but held it in his hand. However, the feeling of stepping on the dirt instead of the cold concrete floor still excited Katie, the tiger. She circled around and around within the leash, even rolling around a few times, just waiting to find a muddy spot to play. Unfortunately, the chain, already sufficiently long, still restricted Katie's range of movement. She couldn't pull the Kryptonian biped holding the other end. Every time the chain was pulled tight, she glanced back. Then, head down, she walked in the other direction, where the chain could be loosened. A tiger under a roof must keep its head down. Before setting off, Henry did something that Barbara couldn't understand. He took off his shoes, tied the laces together, and hung them around his neck. Noticing the girl's surprise, Henry smiled and said, "When I'm out in the wild, I love the feel of the dirt with my feet. That's why I never wear shoes." "That's the same as Katie," Barbara smiled sweetly. As she spoke, she also mustered the courage to approach the tiger and pet its head, imitating Henry's example. However, Katie's awkward retreat made Barbara hesitant to move forward. She just stood there, smiling awkwardly. Then he changed the subject and asked, "Which direction should we go? Where should we camp?" "Just keep walking until we find some water. This is my first time here, but according to the map, if you go due north, there's a small stream not far away. Let's go there and see if it's suitable for camping." In places like the Angeles National Forest, while not urban streets, there are road atlases. However, ordinary people can buy contour maps similar to military maps, though less accurate. These maps will show rivers, roads, and other terrain. The most difficult part of using these maps is finding your position. It's not like urban streets, with street names and house numbers, which make it easy to locate. Barbara Morse, the trainee agent, had certainly received training in wilderness survival techniques, but she didn't want to brag about them just yet. Henry, however, had a different story. The map he mentioned was just an excuse. In reality, the nearest sound of water he'd heard was to the north. It wouldn't take too long, only a kilometer or two on foot. Henry's words fooled Barbara into believing him to be prepared, and she readily believed him. Henry hadn't brought a map beforehand, so he took it out now, just to show off. After all, he hadn't expected Barbara to follow him. But his confidence in knowing everything was no fake. With his advanced senses now giving him a sense of direction, and the ability to utilize the speed of flight when necessary, getting lost was impossible. There was no need to tell Barbara these things. With the two of them and the tiger ready, Henry locked the car door and headed towards the sound of rushing water. This wasn't Katie's first time leaving her small concrete cage and entering the unfettered world. Despite being unrestrained, she'd previously been confined to a certain area, never fully exploring the world. If she strayed too far, the Kryptonian Twalug would whistle to call her back. If she didn't return, he would personally come and fetch her. The feeling of being on all fours, soaring at a height where she couldn't land safely, was terrifying. At first, Katie was frightened more than once. This time, however, they drove into the forest, enjoying the breeze. Then, they moved on foot again, no longer confined to an invisible area as before. Katie felt a huge difference, and the tiger became much more excited. It would have been even better if they weren't chained. North American forests are unlike the South American rainforests, with their dense layers of vegetation, so lush that even larger animals can't easily move through them. Even if a person wanted to move, they'd have to hack and slash their way through with a machete. Perhaps due to the higher latitude, the trees in North American forests aren't as densely packed together. For Katie, who had just been weaned and taken from her mother, everything was new and exciting. Sheep Cave Valley was especially desert, with its earth and stone. Here, in the forest, the ecology was much richer, and there were so many things she had never seen before. So Katie ran around excitedly, looking and sniffing everywhere, completely busy. Especially since there were no native animals like tigers in North America. So many animals, seeing a tiger for the first time, paused in curiosity, staring at Katie from afar. But the apex predator's power is still strong. Even wild animals who haven't seen a tiger before will take flight without stopping at the mere scent of a predator. It's as if the order of the food chain is etched in their DNA. This made Katie, trying to approach her new friends, bow her head in frustration. For Katie, who has no worries about food, with fresh meat often presented to her, her hunting instincts seem to have been forgotten. When she sees other animals that run and jump, she simply wants to play with them, not eat them. But don't assume Katie's approach is harmless. BB, Henry's core robot, who has undergone countless generations of refinement, has the final say. Just ask how many creatures can withstand the slap of a claw or the bite of a tiger's fangs. Throughout her journey, Katie stayed at the edge of the chain, exploring this unfamiliar world. Compared to the tiger's curiosity, Barbara clung to Henry, not daring to stray even a step. It was unclear whether this attitude was an attempt to draw Henry closer, employing her feminine charm. Or perhaps she was simply frightened by Katie, and didn't want to stray too far from Henry, lest her master be unable to stop her. Finally, the sound of a gurgling stream reached Barbara's ears, bringing a touch of coolness to the woods. Chapter 288 Hunting. In the summer, mountain streams can swell rapidly due to heavy rainfall, making streambeds and sandbars unsuitable for camping. This is especially true if one can tolerate being suddenly adrift in the middle of the night. Henry found a higher spot, near the edge of the woods, with no signs of flooding nearby, and unloaded his gear. Seeing this, Barbara also unloaded her backpack and asked, "Are you camping here?" "Yes, for the day," Henry replied. He then untied the chain from Katie's collar, patted her head twice, and let her go. Unchained, Katie leaped into the stream without a backward glance, drinking and rolling around. Then, she darted into the woods, disappearing into the distance. "Well, won't Katie get lost?" Barbara asked worriedly. Henry smiled and said, "Don't worry. She'll come back when it's time to eat." "No, aren't you worried about Katie running into other campers and biting us? Then we'll just have to bury us deeper to avoid being discovered," Henry joked. Barbara had been accustomed to Henry's occasional outbursts since their trip earlier this year, so she let out a few awkward laughs and ignored the incident. Henry had actually chosen this location after using a super senses to confirm that no one else was around, minimizing the risk of exposure. Whether it was his various superpowers or Katie, the tiger, he had prepared a duplex yurt for two, with fiberglass poles, making it easy for even one person to set up. But Barbara wouldn't just stand by and watch. With her quick hands, she also helped, though not in the annoying way. Working together, the two of them had the yurt set up in no time. Henry packed up his unused belongings in the tent, took out his prepared bow and arrows, and said to Barbara, "Rest here for a while, or go play in the stream." "Hey, can't I come along?" Barbara said coquettishly. "Mom, I'm going hunting." "How crazy would I be to bring an amateur along to disturb the prey?" "If you don't want to be fed to Katie today, just stay here and let me prepare dinner," Barbara pouted and said, I can help. If you want to help, please go into the forest and help collect some firewood. I don't want to eat raw meat with Katie, okay? Be careful. I know. Henry, armed with his bow and arrow, walked barefoot through the knee-deep stream. He followed Katie into the woods. Meanwhile, Barbara pulled a cell phone from her backpack, held it above her head, and paced back and forth. Finally, she gave up, muttering, "Sure enough, there's no signal. Boss Fury, it's not that I don't want to repay you." Then she put the phone back in her bag. Barbara, dressed in a sexy outfit, gazed at the natural scenery of green mountains, clear waters, blue sky, and white clouds. She folded her arms over her chest and shuddered. "Ah, sir. Bringing a girl like me to a place like this, there's no reason to run away." Henry, already 3 kilometers into the forest, shuddered. It wasn't some magical sixth sense, but rather he'd heard the girl's words. Just that shudder caused his arrow to miss. It looked like it would only hide a nearby tree, missing the intended buck. Henry immediately exerted super speed, catching up with his own arrow and adjusting the trajectory of his shot so it would pierce the buck's eye socket. By the time he regained his normal speed, the buck, unable to react, was pierced through the brain by the arrow, instantly dying. Looking at the fallen deer, Henry thought, if he was about to use his powers, why was he still holding a bow and arrow? He was truly, having been distracted by that girl. He couldn't help but mutter, "Boys have to protect themselves when they're out and about." He hoisted the deer onto his shoulder and headed back. Henry wondered if bringing Barbara out this time had been a hasty move. He'd thought Katie would scare her off, but it seemed to have given Barbara more reason to cling to him. Henry, pondering this, returned to the stream. He whistled, and Katie immediately rushed out from a short distance. She looked like a mountain king, slashing through the trails, clutching a dead rabbit. Katie, reaching Henry's feet, dropped the rabbit and poked it with her front paw. It was like chasing BB at home, then letting it go, hoping it would keep running. Henry knew he'd miscalculated again. He'd thought that keeping Katie from other tigers and from learning hunting techniques would effectively curb her predatory instincts. However, to reduce BB's frequent repairs, he not only repeatedly repaired a damaged core robot, but also used stronger materials and added evasive features and gadgets. For example, the suction cup arrows combined with the grappling hook's retractable rope design gave BB three-dimensional movement, expanding its options for evading Katie. It seemed this had actually honed Katie's chasing ability, indirectly strengthening her hunting skills. A small animal, roughly the size of a baby, couldn't withstand a tiger's pounces and bites when Katie tried to play with it. It was a real headache. Lifting the dead rabbit, Katie's expression and movements were like someone who had broken a baby and wanted Henry to fix it quickly. It seemed the tiger thought it could bring the rabbit back to life. As expected, a dangerous beast remains dangerous no matter how well it's kept. It won't become a house cat. Helplessly, Henry carried the dead rabbit, intending to roast it for dinner. However, he wouldn't give Katie the rabbit, he'd let her eat venison instead. He couldn't let her get into the habit of eating animals he'd killed. Scratching the tiger's head, Henry imitated the tiger's roars. "Come with me, let's eat," roar. Okay, since the tiger translator had been successful, Henry hadn't forgotten to learn some common tiger language. Otherwise, out in the wild, without the translator, wouldn't he be speaking different languages? Henry walked out of the woods, carrying a deer and a rabbit, with a tiger at his heels. On the other side of the stream, Barbara had already gathered a large quantity of firewood, both long and short. She just didn't have the right tools to chop the longer logs. The long logs would be perfect for making a rack, hanging the deer to bleed it, and then making a simple grill. Seeing the man and the tiger return, Barbara smiled happily and said, "You're back so soon. Could it all be Katie's work? You're just following along to take advantage, you little bitch. You don't even realize what others are doing. If I'd let Katie go hunting, I could have hung you up and bled you by now. You know what I mean." Chapter 289 Camping Dinner. Despite being a summer night, the chill still permeated the campground, flanked by trees and a stream, forcing people to lean closer to the fire for warmth. Barbara maintained her fiery daytime look, not even considering pulling out the warm clothing from her backpack, hoping the man would take the initiative and share his warmth. Henry, however, simply diligently fanned the flames, staring at the deer legs, venison, and a skinned rabbit roasting directly over the fire. Barbara had no choice but to move closer to the fire, warming herself while waiting for the man to notice her. Not far away, Katie was gnawing onto raw deer legs, her mouth stained with blood, a terrifying sight. Fortunately, after Henry chopped off the legs, he bled the rest, otherwise the venison would have had a strange smell. Barbara asked, puzzled, why feed Katie raw meat instead of cooked meat? Aren't you worried about parasites or wildlife diseases? Henry, looking a little helpless, replied, because raw meat and blood contain nutrients tigers need. Until we find a suitable supplement, we'll have to ignore minor issues like parasites for now. Seeing Henry wasn't in the mood for conversation today, unlike their previous encounters, when he was full of flirtatious talk, Barbara had to keep trying to find a topic. Glancing anxiously at the woods in a certain direction, she asked, isn't it bad to just throw deer entrails away? Don't we need to dig a hole and bury it? Henry explained, typically, campers bury inedible organs or animal remains because they're afraid the smell will attract carnivores and pose a threat, but with him around, do you think any carnivores could pose a threat to us, even if there weren't tabbies in North America? Judging by their size, few would dare approach. The tiger pointed by Henry just raised its face from the pile of meat. The tiger's imposing head was scarlet around its mouth, looking extremely ferocious. But after listening to Henry's explanation, Barbara snorted in dissatisfaction and said, do you still insist that it is a tabby cat? Where can there be such a big cat? Henry, who was still stubborn, said proudly, of course there is one. There is one right here. Hello, Katie, meow and listen to it, roar, eating, busy. In fact, the expression of tiger language is quite simple, and there are not so many words with unique tones. So this roar can also be translated as, eating, get out, it depends on what everyone can accept. Henry was not too indignant about Katie's words. It is said that barking dogs don't bite. Katie can't beat herself, so why shouldn't she be allowed to roar once or twice? In short, the interaction between this man and the tiger made Barbara convinced that this male tiger was indeed a rival in love. This combination is really too bad. So she shoulders the sacred task of making a man understand the beauty of women, instead of looking strangely at a male tiger. It's so cold. With her arms folded and rubbing her upper arms, Barbara moved to sit closer to Henry. She wanted to move closer, but Henry filled a bowl of mushroom and vegetable soup, stood between them, and pushed her back. If Barbara didn't want to be drenched in the hot soup, she had to be forced to retreat. The man who thoughtfully brought a bowl of hot soup said with a smile, if you feel cold, drink it while it's hot, it's just right. It can fill your stomach before eating barbecue. After half forcing the bowl of soup into Barbara's hand, Henry still used that thoughtful and gentle tone and said, don't you have any warm clothes? I have a thin jacket. I'll get it for you first. No, hot soup is enough. Barbara showed no impatience, but drank her soup while thinking about her next attack. However, every time she launched an attack, Henry would just block it with food. Barbara didn't want to refuse him, and the food in her hand looked like only a little bit, which could be finished in 1 or 2 bites. So she could only finish the food as soon as possible and then launch the next wave of attack. Just like that, inexplicably, Barbara was fed so much that she burped. At this moment, she took the initiative to pour a bowl of soup and drink it to get rid of the greasiness in her mouth and help herself digest the food. Although Henry was desperately feeding Barbara, he also ate a lot himself. Seeing that the little girl had surrendered, he swept away the remaining barbecue in a very short time, leaving nothing behind. In comparison, the slowest eater was Katie, who was gnawing on the deer leg next to her. She looked like she was enjoying herself slowly, and from time to time she would lick the edge of her mouth with her tongue, showing her domineering posture. Just as Henry was sipping his soup, Barbara leaned in again. There was no way to stop her unless he spilled the hot soup on her. Henry didn't want to defend herself to that extent. So, after trying all night, Barbara finally rested her head on the man's shoulder, a very ambiguous gesture. If you're tired, you can go into the tent and sleep. Katie and I will be outside, so there won't be anyone to crowd you, Henry said, calmly sipping his soup. Do you hate me? Barbara asked softly, her voice coquettish. Well, strictly speaking, I don't, so you like me. No one would hate a cute girl like you, Henry smiled. However, this answer seemed to infuriate Barbara, causing her to look up and face the man holding the bowl of soup. If that's the case, then why don't you accept me? Henry said, peering into the soup pot with a puzzled look on his face. I'm pretty sure the mushrooms I picked are edible and don't have any hallucinogenic properties. I didn't drink alcohol today, so you've caught a cold, or have a fever. Henry reached out to touch Barbara's forehead. The angry girl slapped him away. I'm not sick, I'm serious. Then what do you like about me? Henry asked casually, not even glancing at the angry girl. He returned his attention to his bowl of soup. Do you believe in love at first sight? I do. Then do you know I like you? I don't. Why? Barbara nearly jumped up, questioning the man. Henry glanced at the girl beside him and said, to fall in love with someone at first sight, that person must be incredibly beautiful or handsome. Or else, they're blinded by the stench of money, and my appearance has been certified by a professional agent. I'm so unremarkable that I can only choose the supporting role. I'd have to work in Hollywood for at least 20 years before I'd have a chance to be remembered. And that's just a chance, not a guarantee. I'm certainly not the kind of sugar daddy rich enough to support a college girl. I've only been a bit player for over half a year, and an assistant to a washed-up star for over a year. So, what are you trying to achieve? It makes me think more. Chapter 290 Revealing the Cards. The most important reason Henry couldn't bring himself to speak out was because she was Barbara Morse. If she had approached him under a false name, Henry might have fallen for it. He was completely captivated by her. A blonde beauty throwing herself at him, what could anyone dream of? No matter if there were any ulterior motives, he'd just go for it. But SHIELD Agent 19, codenamed Mockingbird, was too famous in the Marvel Universe. Or rather, these famous people weren't easy to deal with, even if she hadn't achieved greatness yet. Henry didn't dare gamble on whether she just happened to have the same name. It would be easiest to just treat her as the person. Besides, what could a girl with such good conditions be after him for? According to Western thinking, collecting stamps might be a way to leave a souvenir on the West Coast, but collecting stamps requires mutual consent. After several polite rejections at the beginning of the year, she came back a semester later. Either she had ulterior motives or she was out for revenge. Under such circumstances, how desperate would one have to be to approach such a woman? When faced with a sugar-coated bullet, not everyone can swallow the sugar coating and throw the bullet back. If it explodes in your mouth while you're eating it, who's to blame? So it wasn't that Henry was unmoved, but rather that the risks outweighed the benefits. Looking at Barbara's faint shock, but my bewildered expression, Henry continued, on the surface, I'm not the least bit attractive. I have some self-awareness, then the only possibility that I could attract a beauty like you is my undisclosed identity and abilities. So the question is, what agency are you an agent for, or what country are you a spy for? Even Barbara, still a bit unsure about people's hearts, knew to resist. She shook her head frantically, saying, No, 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 how could I be an agent or a spy? I just like your humor and your erudition. The girl's words were actually quite guilty. Henry laughed and said, Girl, if you graduated from a third-rate high school, I might believe you today, but a top school like Georgia Tech wouldn't be filled with nerds or athletic recruits. There wouldn't even be a single humorous or wealthy person. Forget about the erudition, it's simply destroying Georgia Technician's reputation. You might as well just say we met as kids, and I helped you chase away some little girls. I still remember that. As if getting a hint, Barbara said excitedly, Yes, I've never dared to tell you. I grew up in Los Angeles, and that story about you being a relative of Gary's ex-wife is also fake, Henry said abruptly. If Barbara didn't realize she was exposed, she'd have wasted her time. She quickly calmed down, regaining her shrewd expression. She asked calmly, Will I make it out of the forest alive today? It's not that serious, is it? And Gary knows I brought you out. If you don't go back, I'll be the prime suspect. I don't need to get myself into trouble, so my safety is guaranteed. After all, I don't have anything to lose. I just hope you won't focus on me. It's pointless, Barbara said knowingly. Due to confidentiality, I can't reveal too much. But I can say that we represent the official position, dedicated to upholding world justice and peace. Are you so opposed to us? Henry chuckled twice and said, Justice requires a position, while peace requires the joint efforts of everyone. Don't you think these are two contradictory ideals, unless the peace you want is a slave-like peace where everyone submits to your justice? In that case, your organization might as well be more forthright and emulate those villains in TV dramas and declare, I want to conquer the world. Barbara, still studying and with her ideas still unsettled, felt less confident after being teased by Henry. She frantically scratched her head, trying to find a loophole in his words to counterattack. The problem was, with such inductive remarks, one couldn't follow the other person's train of thought. Otherwise, it would be like being entangled in a fishing net. The more you struggle, the tighter it gets. It's like facing a hot-headed keyboard warrior. There are only two ways to defeat him. One is a real-life PK, the other is to be unreasonable and just yell at him. Using Stephen Chow's approach, no matter how many sophistry he throws at me, I'll just say motherfucker, unsophisticated, or perhaps it's true. This world hasn't yet seen the emergence of keyboard warriors on a large scale, with online communication limited to a small minority. Barbara could only muster one question: aren't you a patriot? The word patriot holds a very different meaning for Americans, who founded their own country. Their roots lie in a group of traitors who rationalized their actions by abandoning their original country and huddling together in a new land. They call themselves patriots to conceal their origins. Without this fig leaf, they can't hide the fact that they are both losers who fled to the New World and traitors who betrayed their homeland. The only advantage they have over the Australians is that they aren't exiled criminals. Regardless of whether he can return to his former homeland, Henry finds it hard to like the United States. He sighed and said helplessly, I just happened to be here. He had woken up in Alaska, having made his first fortune on a crabbing boat and obtained legal U.S. citizenship thanks to Old Tom. At that stage, Henry didn't think much of it, simply letting circumstances take him. If he had woken up in Norway, England, Australia, New Zealand, or any other country, as long as he had a reason to stay and wouldn't be deported as an illegal immigrant, he would have stayed. We'd see how things developed. Henry's answer, while unsatisfying, didn't necessarily place him in the same camp. Starting with the counterculture movement of the 1960s, with the rise of the hippies, anarchism, anti-war sentiment, and sexual liberalism, this group could almost be categorized as the opposite of patriots, but could they not be considered American? Today, the only people who hold high the banner of patriotism are rednecks and those within the American core class. The latter, in particular, fail the test of loyalty, and even their career paths are blocked. That's the kind of place Barbara stayed. Pulling Henry in was both Nick Fury's request and her hope. Now that Henry had knocked down the door himself, what else could she do? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291: A Failure That Isn't a Failure. Nick Fury's original plan was to have Barbara Morse win over Henry Brown. He'd lower his guard and test his intentions. Then, Fury, the boss, would step in and win him over. Later, Barbara changed her mind. She was captivated by Henry's attentiveness and thoughtfulness during the trip, not to mention his humorous conversation. This sparked the idea of a boyfriend for the university student, and they could work together. Regardless of SHIELD's rules against office romances, they hadn't considered what would happen if Henry didn't go along with their plan. Barbara then realized something. She had long known that this man was wary. Even sincerity wouldn't necessarily impress him, let alone approach him while lying. So, Barbara asked Fury to let her handle Henry's work. Because she fell in love with someone, she brought them into a company she believed had great potential. This was an acceptable development for both men and women, and Henry was likely less likely to object. If the other party realized the lies, rejection was the only outcome. But if the lies were exposed, would the outcome be any different? Barbara, now filled with deep regret, said with a bitter face, "If I told you I truly have a crush on you, would you believe me?" "What do you like about me?" Henry asked. "Your humor, and your erudition," Barbara said guiltily. Henry said, "Ha ha ha. Bobby, you're a good girl. You have a chance of finding a man better than me. You don't have to set your sights on someone like me. As for the organization behind you, no matter who they are, I believe there are many heroes willing to save the world. No one is irreplaceable. I'm too insignificant, if everyone thinks this way, unwilling to step forward when faced with a problem, believing someone else will do it, then in the end, no one will do it. Isn't that right?" Barbara said excitedly. Henry poked the fire with a stick and said, "So you should look for the kind of good people willing to save the world, not someone like me who just wants to live a good life. If you like me, thank you, but I still have to say, we're not a good match. If the organization behind you wants me, I can only say, unfortunately, our ideologies don't align. I can't be the kind of good person you hope for." Throwing the stick in his hand into the fire, Henry faced Barbara directly for the first time since he started talking. "Don't worry, though. While I can't be a good person, I don't have the guts to be a bad one either. Just tell your boss what you're saying. Now, you can go into the tent and get some good sleep. Katie and I will stay outside. No one will hurt you. Well, no cat, no tiger would do that. Tomorrow, I'll get you safely back to the city. You live your colorful life, and I'll live my dull, boring one. Barbara didn't give up. She grabbed Henry's arm, leaned her tearful face against his, and said, "Even so, can't we leave a memory?" Then she closed her eyes. Her shiny, tender lips curled slightly, as if ready for the pluck. Henry flicked his finger, making her head pop. He didn't use much force, but the pain still made Barbara clutch her forehead in frustration, her small, resentful eyes glaring up at the unromantic man. "Be good, go to bed. Otherwise, it might not be me you see going wild," Henry threatened playfully. Not far away, Katie, bored from gnawing on a deer leg, roared in agreement. Then she licked her face. Until the next day. When they returned to downtown Los Angeles, Barbara, as if in a rage, refused to speak to Henry. She ate and drank as she pleased, nodding and shaking her head in response. Following the girls' head navigation, Henry dropped Barbara off at City Hall Park in downtown. Earlier this year, Barbara had also stayed at a hotel nearby. This time, however, she didn't seem to have made reservations. She didn't want to follow Henry back to Gary's apartment building, so she got out there. Katie was tied up in the back seat, but a tiger in the city was too conspicuous, and the police even stopped by several times to ask about her. And that was all because Henry had rolled up the back seat windows. If they had been open, it would have given passers-by heart attacks. So, after dropping Barbara off, Henry drove off without a backward glance. Entering the park, Barbara found a bench and sat down. She had changed back into her dress, wearing a large straw hat that obscured most of her expression. She dialed a number on her cell phone, which rang 3 times before being disconnected. A moment later, a black man sat down at the other end of the bench. Nick Fury, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened, ate a hot dog. In a voice no one else could hear, he mumbled, "When did you get to Los Angeles?" "Yesterday morning." "Well," reported, "the mission failed." "The mission to recruit Henry Brown?" Fury frowned, swallowed his hot dog, and asked, "What happened?" "I was exposed." Barbara recounted the events of the past 2 days in detail, including the temptations that had led to her failure. Finally, Barbara said dejectedly, "I'm sorry, I screwed up. I shouldn't have taken the initiative to see him." Nick Fury finished the rest of his hot dog and clapped his hands. At the same time, he added subtly, "Don't worry, things aren't as pessimistic as you think. While it wasn't the most ideal outcome, the mission wasn't a failure." Barbara's disbelief peeked from beneath her straw hat. Full of confusion, Fury explained, "This is the result of a psychological profile of Henry Brown, compiled by the Bureau's psychologists. He's a very rational man, but his actions aren't simply rejections. He'll choose the least cumbersome option. For example, this time he rejected you because he realized that too much contact with you would cause him trouble. But judging by his performance as Audrey Hepburn's assistant, he understands the value of compromise, provided there's an acceptable reward. He won't back down easily when it counts. Perhaps, as you report, he's not a patriot. But as long as he can be a competent tool, the only question left is how we use him. Do you understand what I mean?" Barbara gave an expression that said, "I don't understand, but I'm shocked," and was speechless. Nick Fury said, "Bobby, I'm very optimistic about you. If you want to be more than just an ordinary agent, you have to learn these things. This is a good experience, think about it." What Fury didn't mention was that Henry Brown had recently been surrounded by a girl, also blonde and blue-eyed. According to his agent's intuition. Well, okay. There was no need to escalate to that level. Fury also knew that revealing this information would make things very complicated. It was better not to say it. Chapter 292, Deep Thoughts on the Beach. In California in the summer, the focus is, of course, on sunshine, sand, and bikinis. Los Angeles, in particular, is home to numerous famous beaches. Not only are they great for surfing, they're also popular dating destinations for young men and women. To make up for the golden tan he hasn't had since waking up in Alaska in the fall of 1990, Henry brings his own beach chair and spends the entire day rotating through several of Los Angeles' famous beaches. There's Santa Monica Beach, Venice Beach, Malibu Beach, Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, Zuma Beach, Matador State Beach, and Dockweiler Beach. Each offers its own unique natural beauty and a wealth of breathtaking sights. The sights, like crashing waves, tumbling hips, and a forest of slinky legs, are truly breathtaking. It's fair to say that for the first time, Henry has found a renewed drive to bask in the sun. He wants to bask every day, never getting tired of it. Of course, that's all he needs to do. He also limits his superpowers, like his eyes that can see down to the atomic level. If he truly sees that, is he trying to describe the beauty of the balance between the nucleus and the electron's trajectory? But while Henry was basking in the sun, his super brain wasn't just sitting there, idle and doing nothing. The year was 1994. For Henry, the big event of 1995 was the release of Microsoft's Windows 95. Most computer operations could be performed with a mouse, simply by clicking on icons. This freed computer users from having to memorize complex commands and parameters, undoubtedly making computer use much easier. Although Henry had released a Windows distribution for Linux under the CK name, Linux was ultimately inferior to Microsoft's corporate-led, integrated operating system software. The mere issue of adapting the Windows distribution to Linux, and the question of whether users could recompile the distribution to adapt it to their own operating system if it didn't work, was a daunting challenge for many users. Not only were the features and performance incomparable, but the entry level to adoption was also vastly different. Linux's only advantage was its open source, free software. Microsoft's Windows 95 was incredibly expensive. But Henry wasn't aiming to support Linux in order to steal Microsoft's personal computer market. Rather, it was the impending wave of the World Wide Web. While the browser wars between IE and Netscape were exciting and seemed like an opportunity, Henry's desire to develop a free, open-source browser faced a similar problem to Linux. While people loved using free things, most people couldn't stomach the free labor of maintaining and revising them. Unless he was truly interested in starting a company, his haphazard approach to Linux development wouldn't allow him to defeat a well-funded, established force like Microsoft. At best, he'd be a troublemaker. Whether developing a search engine, a portal, or a platform destined for the dark web, the most crucial component was the servers on which the software was deployed. In his Los Angeles apartment, Henry had crafted a server-class computer more advanced than any modern computer. However, it was primarily used as a testing platform, not as a true server. Before now, CK relied on worms spread through the Joker forums to secretly occupy a small portion of servers on various campuses and deploy his own software. These surreptitiously deployed websites often failed. Some were discovered and deleted by administrators. After all, these were outdated technologies from several years ago, and CK didn't maintain or upgrade them regularly after deployment. It wasn't surprising that today's experts would discover anomalies and remove them. Some were simply equipment failures, and the data they had installed was naturally lost. Administrators had no obligation to tell CK that the equipment was obsolete and to quickly transfer their data to a new one. So, to cope with the coming internet boom, Henry came up with the idea of building a permanent server. Of course, this permanence didn't mean it would last for millions of years, forever. Rather, it required finding a suitable location that wouldn't be damaged by outsiders or forced to relocate due to human interference. Besides the location, running a server required two other essentials: electricity and a communications network. These couldn't be slammed shut and cut off at will. Henry had no intention of continuing to pay for them. Therefore, he had to find a way to generate his own electricity, and for the communications network, he planned to connect to existing cables, leveraging free American bandwidth. To meet these three requirements, the most suitable location for a permanent server was the ocean floor. The submarine's advantages in concealment are self-evident. While Tony Stark failed to obtain the arc reactor design, power generation could be achieved by utilizing ocean currents to drive turbines. Ocean currents inherently maintain a constant velocity and direction, making them far more stable than solar or wind power. All that's needed is a way to improve power generation efficiency. Communications networks naturally target submarine cables. With Henry's underwater capabilities, adding an additional line to existing submarine cables wouldn't be a problem. Considering the above three factors, Henry must find a seabed with both a submarine cable and currents. Flatness isn't crucial. If the need arises, Henry can simply prepare the seabed. Furthermore, deploying servers on the seabed offers the added advantage of water cooling. First and foremost, pure water doesn't conduct electricity. Water conducts electricity, but it's the electrolytes in it that cause the problem. Therefore, as long as the internal and external layers are completely insulated and seawater is prevented from entering the equipment, the server can be completely immersed in pure water for heat dissipation. This water cooling method also eliminates the need for fans, indirectly reducing the server's overall power consumption. This power can be used to improve performance or expand equipment. So, Henry, who recently indulged in sunbathing on various beaches, was also searching for a suitable underwater location to build his permanent server. Whenever the initial long-distance surveys revealed a site that met the requirements, Henry would personally dive in to confirm it. He wasn't just doing it to protect his eyes. He had a serious business. The first underwater server also served another crucial purpose, to test the feasibility of the idea and whether it could withstand large-scale deployment. During actual use, would there be any flaws that needed to be corrected, unforeseen in the initial plans? After all, Henry wasn't one of those wealthy individuals with incredible financial resources who could easily build a secret base, supercomputer, or server without risk of discovery or destruction. Not to mention the ongoing costs involved. If he went the official route, he'd have to pay for electricity and communications. With Henry's modest coffers, he wouldn't be able to sustain this for long. Besides searching for a suitable deployment site, Henry was also considering server equipment. From chips to hard drives, existing commercially available products didn't meet Henry's requirements. Since everything had to be built in-house, the server design and layout didn't need to consider universal specifications. The most important consideration was overall power consumption. How could one accurately calculate this and design the corresponding ocean current turbine generator? This underwater server was a test for Henry, a man who had always built his own computer hardware. If he wanted to achieve technological success, rather than simply relying on superpowers to solve all problems, and didn't have the financial resources to back it up, this was a hurdle he had to overcome. If he couldn't overcome this, he shouldn't pursue this field in the future. Use your superpowers and crush everything that stood in his way. Chapter 293, Start of Work and Seeking Help. The underwater server was constructed at the docks, temporarily renting a warehouse and operating directly there. The advantage was that once construction was complete, they could enter the water immediately. The server would then be transported to its designated location underwater, avoiding most official surveillance and minimizing exposure. Furthermore, Henry didn't need large-scale machine tools to build anything. Most operations could be completed using heat radiation and manual labor. A few tools, however, were minor, such as lenses and needles made of various materials. The former was used to further reduce the diameter of the heat radiation beam, while the latter were used to adjust minute details. This experimental underwater server, in particular, was not intended for repair or replacement. If it broke, it would be scrapped or recycled. Therefore, many joints were simply welded, rather than screws or slots. This saved a lot of trouble, materials, and labor. It was autumn, not because the number of bikini-clad women on the beach had decreased, but simply because a suitable location had been found and a plan, simulated by the superbrain, had matured, so construction began. Just as Henry's construction was in full swing, the phone at his rented apartment rang. Since the phone ring is connected to Henry's homemade reminder device, it can use ultra-high-frequency sound to remind himself when he is not at home. It is the same device as the call bell of the Black Clinic basically. The range is within a radius of 20 kilometers. Henry does not need to deliberately use super hearing monitoring to notice the special sound. The phone is connected to an answering machine, so there is no need to deliberately go back to the rental house to answer it. If the other party has something important, they will naturally leave a message. But today is a little different. It was Charlize Theron who had not been seen for a long time on the phone. Her voice was a little nervous and panicked. "Henry, I'm sorry, I don't know who to ask for help. If you can hear this message, please help me. I don't know where I am, I only know that I am in a photography studio in the north of Hollywood. I'm sorry, I really don't know what to do. Help me." Hearing such a message, it was impossible not to be moved. But he wasn't about to blindly search for someone north of Hollywood. Henry stopped what he was doing and, using super speed, returned to his rental. First, he checked the call log. American calls contain the incoming caller's phone number. While regular phones don't display the incoming caller's number, Henry's modified answering machine did. With a phone number, one could infer the approximate area from the number. This was based on the conventions of old telephone exchanges, where numbers starting with the same number would appear at the same exchange. Although the exchange had undergone numerous upgrades and its technology was vastly superior, the practice of allocating numbers hadn't changed much. Furthermore, with a phone number, one could search the yellow pages. However, the records in the directory were sorted by the name of the caller or company, not by phone number. For the average person, finding a specific number would be like finding a needle in a haystack. But for Henry, a Kryptonian, it was a piece of cake. Unless the call was too recent, the yellow pages didn't have a record. Fortunately, the phone number Charlize Theron used was registered to the Yaffe photography studio. The studio didn't advertise in the yellow pages, so there was no address, only the studio's name. However, this information was enough for Henry to narrow his search for Charlize Theron. He flew directly to the rooftop of a high-rise building in the target area and surveyed the area. This area was very close to the San Fernando Valley, another mecca of Los Angeles comparable to Hollywood. So, was she tricked into making an adult film? Since he had only received a single, impulsive phone call, Henry couldn't speculate on the details. So, he simply stood on the rooftop, using his super senses to locate the girl begging for help. Since the location was a photography studio, he focused on signs and similar features, omitting any obvious differences and shortening the search. Furthermore, the area was far from the city center, lacking tall buildings, mostly single-family homes. The so-called high-rise building Henry was standing on was just a 3-story apartment building. Even at this height, it stood out from the crowd. Henry quickly located Charlize Theron, more easily than he'd imagined. The woman was wearing a bathrobe, nothing underneath. The only other people in the room were men, but he didn't see any men wearing bathrobes like Charlize, preparing for the show. And the equipment used was a camera, not a video camera. So it was just taking photos, not filming? The person next to the woman was her agent, John Crosby. The talent scout and agent was trying to convince his embarrassed woman that she should strip for the sake of art. If he took this step, he'd be one step closer to the San Fernando Valley. Henry didn't rush in directly, but hailed a taxi nearby. This wasn't a busy city area, so taxis were uncommon, and finding one on the street was a challenge. After getting in the back seat, the driver asked, "Where are you going?" Henry gave the address of the photography studio, which was very close to where he'd been picked up. The driver turned to the passenger in the back seat with surprise and asked, "Sir, your destination is only 2 blocks away, why don't you just walk over there?" He pulled out 4 or 5 $20 bills from his pocket and folded them in half. Henry handed them over. "Wait for me 10 minutes when we get there. I'll bring someone out and leave immediately. The fare will be extra." Hearing this strange request and the generous tip, the driver looked at the passenger in the back seat worriedly and asked, "Will you get me into trouble? If you hear gunshots, just run." "I probably won't make it out alive, Walt, haha, I'm kidding. It's just that my friend and I have to go somewhere urgent, and it's not easy to get a taxi here." "You can understand." Henry shook the bills in his hand again. Although the driver took the bills, he didn't seem to want to accept them. "Since the tip is quite large, I have to remind you. There's a photography studio at the address you are going to that specializes in taking pictures of Playboy or Sacred Valley women. They have some background, so you'd better not get involved with that group of people. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to get out of the car. And this money is for advice." "Are they a gang?" "No, but the Nichols and Mexicans in the South District don't dare to mess with them." "That's all I know." After thinking about it, Henry said, "Drive. You can park farther away. And if you have any problems, just leave first." "Is that okay?" Shrugging, the driver put the money in his bag and drove forward. Chapter 294 Shooting Scene. At the photoshoot, the photographer, camera in hand, constantly adjusted his angle, pressing the shutter button at the perfect moment. Then, he quickly rewound the film, ready for the next shot. Besides the lighting crew, John Crosby sat in a corner, drinking with a white man in a sharp suit, admiring the beautiful scenery. The only voice in the room was the photographer's. He kept shouting, "Look here, look there, go to the window, hands down, hands up," directing the model's poses. Suddenly, a voice that didn't belong to the photographer entered the room. "Oh, so this is a photography studio? Different rooms have different designs. It looks like we can do more than just taking photos, we can do video too. Who are you?" The startled photographer looked at the stranger standing not far behind him. Henry, recognizing the man, Charlize Theron, realizing her predicament, hurriedly crouched down and hugged her legs. Upon noticing the intruder, a number of burly men immediately rushed from all over the studio. Each one had a ferocious look, creating an oppressive presence. Henry, as if nothing had happened, grabbed a nearby bathrobe and draped it over the curled-up girl. John Crosby then jumped out, pointing at the man he'd met once before, and yelled, "Henry, what are you doing? You're interfering with Charlize's work, you know that." "Work?" Henry glanced around curiously, then couldn't help but laugh. "That kind of work. Don't assume that taking aesthetic photos is an artistic endeavor, something to be condemned or viewed with skepticism. But those moments uncaptured by the camera challenge the human imagination, not moral standards." After downing the amber whiskey in his glass, the respectable man in a suit stood up. "Boy, you don't think this is a heroic act, do you? We're a legitimate studio, carrying out contracted work. You can't just opt out of this if you don't want to. Do you want to hear the consequences of breaching the contract?" Henry held the girl's head, not wanting her to stand up and speak. He himself was looking at the man in a suit who looked quite imposing, and the thugs around him. Some of them even showed off the guns on their waists, just waiting to use them. Such a scene certainly couldn't scare Henry, although the super brain kept telling him that punching was the fastest way to pass the level. But the fastest solution is not the best solution. Once a bad start is made, there is no room for regret, and you can only rely on fists to pass the level forever. So Henry never thought of doing things by violence. He stated his request in a friendly manner. "I just want to take her away, of course, including the film that shouldn't be in the camera. Is that okay?" At the same time, he slowly took something out of his pocket and flicked it towards the man in a suit who looked like the boss, drawing a gorgeous parabola in the air. The man in the suit grabbed it and saw the gold coin in his palm. He asked, "Where did you get this thing from?" Henry smiled and said, "A gold coin, a promise." "I thought the rule was to just answer yes or no, without asking why." "John called you Henry." "Henry what? You're not going to even say your name, are you?" "Henry Brown, sir." It didn't take long to consider. The man in the suit grabbed the gold coins, put them in his pocket, and nodded to his men. Everyone immediately made way for him. Letting go of his hand on Charlize's head, Henry smiled and helped her up. At the same time, he pointed at the photographer and reminded, "There are still negatives." On the other hand, he was feeling thankful. Fortunately, the other party recognized the gold coins of the Continental Hotel, so there was a chance for today's matter to end peacefully. Otherwise, he really didn't know how to handle today's affairs without leaving any sequelae. The man in the suit raised his chin slightly, and his men immediately understood and snatched the camera from the photographer's hand. He didn't care about the photographers shouting beside him, and directly opened the film cover and pulled out the film inside with a rather rough action. In fact, even if he was careful, the film would be ruined if it was exposed like this. Of course, the person who did it didn't care whether the film could be used or not. He just threw the pulled film to Henry as a promise. The camera was stuffed back into the photographer's arms. Seeing that the matter was resolved smoothly, Henry asked the girl standing next to him with a terrified face, "Where are your things and clothes? Go get them, I'll wait for you. Then we'll leave." "Wait a minute." John Crosby jumped out and questioned everyone present. "What about today's work? What about the payment for the work?" The man in the suit glanced at the exasperated agent. "Let's just pretend nothing happened today, and we didn't sign a contract. If there's no result, why do you think there's going to be compensation?" John didn't dare to lash out at the man in the suit. Turning around, he grabbed Henry and demanded, cursing, "Do you know what you're doing? Do you think you're helping Charlize? I'm telling you, the compensation for this job today is more than everything she's ever done before combined. Do you know how much I've invested in her? With no return, I'm more anxious than anyone." Henry shook off John's grip and glared at him coldly. "I can go to the Screen Actors Guild and sign in, wait a week or two, and I'll get a background role. You've been with Charlize for the better part of 6 months, and you've only brought her to this kind of place. Doesn't that just prove that your abilities are limited? I think you and Charlize should just end your contract peacefully. Don't let each other down." John, still undeterred, snapped, "Do you think I'd agree to something like that? It's impossible. I'm telling you, it's impossible no matter what. She's my contracted artist. Whatever I tell her to do, she has to do it. No room for rebuttal." Seeing his collar being grabbed, saliva sprayed onto his face. Henry still protected the trembling girl behind him and glanced at the man in the suit watching the show. He smiled and asked, "Can you help me with a contract termination issue?" It seems he's more afraid of you." The man in the suit was clearly indifferent. He shrugged and said, "1 gold coin, 1 promise. I asked you to take the person and the film away and pretend nothing happened. I've fulfilled my promise. The rest of the matter has nothing to do with me." Henry pulled another Continental Hotel gold coin from his pocket and flicked it out with the same technique. The man in the suit quickly caught it midair. Looking at the gold coin in his hand, he sighed, "Now I suspect that you were either too bold to pay it back to the hotel to keep so many gold coins. Or you must have made some extra money on the side. Pay it back." "What do you mean? Did anyone teach you this rule?" "You'll have to find a way to ask that yourself. This has nothing to do with me. It's not something I can discuss." After accepting the second gold coin, the man in the suit asked, "How do you want to terminate the contract?" "My recommended method is that if one of the parties ceases to exist and there's no one to legally inherit the existing contract, it will automatically become invalid." "How about that?" Having been diverted, Henry didn't press the issue. Instead, looking at John's drastically changed expression, he said with a hint of embarrassment, "Just sign a written agreement to terminate the contract. Going to that extent is excessive." Chapter 295 Successful Termination of Contract. There was no need to consult a lawyer about the contents of the affidavit. Henry asked for a piece of paper and a pen, and quickly wrote out the document in legal format. It simply stated the names of both parties, agreeing to unconditionally terminate the agency contract signed on a certain date. Charlize, who had been silent until then, signed her name without a second thought. John Crosby, on the other hand, kept yelling, "You have no right to ask me to give up my own artist. I've taken care of her for so long, and she still owes me a fortune." John refused to even pick up a pen, let alone sign. He kept recounting all the trivial things he had done for Charlize. After a while, the man in the suit, unable to bear it any longer, took the gun from his subordinate and pressed it against the back of John's head, terrifying the agent into silence. The man in the suit looked at Henry. "Boy, don't you think my method of terminating the contract is more effective? Since he won't sign that paper, let's use my method." Without waiting for Henry to say anything, John quickly picked up a pen and quickly signed his name. Then, throwing the pen aside and raising his hands, he declared, I've signed. "Don't shoot." The man in the suit tossed the gun back into his subordinate's arms. His action mirrored the way his subordinate had previously tossed a camera back into the photographer's hands. It was a testament to his camaraderie. Henry also took back the written agreement, examined its contents, confirmed the signatures, and put it away. He casually pulled out 3 rolls of bills and placed them in front of John. "You helped Charlize once. I'm sure no one wants to see things like this. And I know you've invested a lot in Charlize, so consider this money as compensation for your losses. Whether it's enough or not, this matter is settled today. I hope you won't harass her again." With that, Henry followed Charlize to her changing room. He waited briefly outside the door until the girl had changed and collected her belongings, then led her away. Throughout the entire process, none of the suited men intervened, always keeping their word. John Crosby, however, had a gloomy expression. Of the 3 rolls of money Henry had produced, 2 had been taken by the suited men. Henry, like the gangsters, hadn't stacked the bills flat, but rolled them into tubes. The reasoning was that this made it harder to count, especially with counterfeit US dollars in circulation mixed in. It made it easier to slip through the cracks. Henry destroyed all the counterfeit bills he had and didn't use them. He simply mixed small and large denominations in the rolls. In a typical gang, if a subordinate received such money from the boss and foolishly counted it on the spot, it would easily lead to a trust issue and a major incident. So, most of the time, they just took it. Gang members took whatever they wanted, as they saw fit. But John's tears weren't entirely due to losing 2/3 of his compensation. He blamed the man in the suit. "I sent so many girls to you, I thought we were partners. Of course I am, and that hasn't changed. It's just that there are so many girls out there, there's no need to focus on just one. I'm still looking forward to the next one you bring." The man in the suit tried to comfort John, his cash cow. However, as the one who suffered the most loss, John Crosby said unwillingly, "Huh? He thought that just asking me to sign an unconditional termination would be the end of it. It conflicts with the termination clause in the previous agency contract. He won't win the case in court. Not including the money he'll pay out later in the compensation is his biggest mistake." "Oh, you think so?" The man in the suit returned to his original seat and poured himself another glass of whiskey. "John," seeing the nonchalant attitude, asked curiously, "Isn't that so?" Without a consideration, I could easily use the excuses of forged documents, forged signatures, and coercion to overturn the termination agreement. Of course, I won't involve you. This is between me, that girl, and that damned, arrogant, self-righteous guy. The man in the suit placed a second gold coin on the table. I think his omission of compensation for your losses in the termination agreement was actually a warning. Let me tell you, we follow rules, not laws. Today he's resolving this matter according to rules and laws. If you want to challenge him legally, don't blame him for following our rules. In the worst case scenario, I'll have to side with him and help resolve this dispute. After all, I agreed to help resolve this matter, and if you intervene, it's my reputation that's being damaged. This was a serious warning. John Crosby instantly calmed down and looked at the man in the suit with confusion. Who is that Henry Brown? Do you know him? I vaguely heard of him, but the fact he could produce the gold coin means he's on my side. Just remember one thing, the body collector's fee for disposing of the body is just one gold coin. What do you think it would cost him to silence you forever? Shocked by such a blunt warning, John was speechless. Finally, all he could muster was, "Damn it, Henry," half carrying Charlize Theron out of the studio, spotted his taxi. He opened the back door, pushed the distraught girl in, and got in himself. The driver asked, "Are you in trouble? It looks like no one's chasing us with guns." "Yeah, I'm lucky. We met a reasonable group of people," Henry said with a smile, looking at the driver in the front seat. "I was delayed a little longer. I thought you'd leave first. With your tip, I think I can wait a little longer. Besides, if you wait any longer, I can call the police for you, but that's the best I can do." "Now it seems that the person you wanted to rescue has been successfully rescued," Henry laughed. "There's no one to rescue. This is just my friend. She has to go somewhere else for something. She asked me to come and accompany her." The driver did not want to ask about a passenger in the back seat's silence. He changed the subject and asked, "Where are you going?" After giving the address of old Gary's apartment building, the taxi started off. Looking at the girl who was still trembling beside him, Henry touched her shoulder and asked, "It's okay now. Let's go home." A simple sentence and a gentle touch were like turning on a switch. Charlize Theron threw herself into Henry's arms, sobbing softly. No one could imagine how terrible the situation was for a young girl who came to a foreign country alone. Even if she could hide her fear in front of the camera and show the seductive expression that others talked about. So she made a phone call and asked for help from an equally strange man. When Charlize heard the answering machine, she didn't know whether she was desperate or relieved. Thank God. He finally appeared like a knight on a white horse and rescued herself. Charlize Theron's head was so confused at this time that she didn't know what her situation was. She only knew that the strong heartbeat in her ears seemed to be confusing, and gradually filled her entire world. Chapter 296 Passion and Confession. The driver was a shrewd, middle-aged white man. At least he wasn't like the nagging black man who, regardless of the passenger's interest, would unleash his racial rap talent and nag the passengers until they wanted to jump out and commit suicide. The driver remained silent. Henry simply stroked Charlize's head, as if stroking a cat's fur. Of the three people in the taxi, only the girl sobbed softly. However, the sound gradually faded until it was silent. The car remained silent, with only the roar of the engine. Because it was off-peak afternoon, the taxi took no time to get to their destination. Henry gave the fare in cash as a tacit thank you. It was a chance encounter with this driver, and with a little help from him, that he was able to resolve the situation smoothly today. This was much better than having to brave a hail of bullets. He helped the girl, who was like a puppet at his mercy, up the stairs. Henry was thinking about what to do after getting her to the 4th floor and back to her room. Sending her back and then walking away seemed ill-advised. Who knew a frightened girl like this might do something irrational, especially with her roommates away? But staying seemed strange, too. It made one wonder if she had ulterior motives. After stumbling up the 3rd floor, the girl froze, seemingly unable to move. Henry could have continued with her with a little effort, but he didn't want to force her, fearing injury. Just as he was about to ask the girl what was going on, he was caught off guard and pinned against the wall. Henry was somewhat taken aback by Charlize Theron's advances. He had 100 reasons to refuse, 1,000 ways to counter, and 10,000 tricks to avoid them without leaving a trace. But in the end, he was overwhelmed by an ordinary Earth girl. This passionate feeling was quite new. Not only was it a first in this life, but it had never been anything like it in my previous one. The only thing that could compare was probably slurping on escargot at the dinner table. You have to remember that in his past life, before he, as a man, declared that a dog licking a dog can't get a house, he certainly had his share of miserable experiences. They say that experience brings wisdom. How could one achieve such an epiphany without suffering any setbacks in life? He had invested money and time in the woman of his dreams, and was only just short of selling a kidney to buy her a phone. For some unknown reason, in this life, having arrived in the more open-minded America, Henry hesitated to indulge himself, continuing his vegetarian lifestyle as in his previous life. Until today, he'd been pushed back. Well, Henry secretly hoped this moment would last forever. However, Charlize, visibly out of breath, finally let go. But she still held Henry's hands, pressing them against the wall above his head. Looking at the girl, whose eyes seemed to be blazing with fire, Henry felt helpless. I hope this isn't just a way of thanking me, a kiss and then disappearing tomorrow. I'd be quite disappointed, just quite disappointed. You don't like me, how could that be? Who would go to such lengths for a girl they don't like, then cut the crap? Possess me, how did the battle end up in Henry's room? The events in between can't be told, written, or described. Anyway, that's how it happened. In the end, Charlize clung to the man beside her like an octopus, snoring soundly, as if afraid he'd vanish in her dreams. Henry, in turn, embraced this pitiful girl, offering a reciprocal embrace. Even though it wasn't sleep time, he let himself drift off, refusing to dwell on anything else. But this sleep wasn't destined to last. The playful kitten had ripped off the covers and jumped onto the bed. Oh, Henry had forgotten about it. But even in his half-asleep state, he still managed to kick Katie hard, sending her flying off the bed. Charlize, equally disturbed, opened her sleepy eyes and looked at the hazy tiger head at the foot of the bed. Katie's bloody mouth opened wide and roared, "Time to eat." The girl, whose brain had barely reached the edge of rationality, was silent for 3 seconds. Then, with a 3-octave scream loud enough to lift the ceiling, Henry's mind suddenly cleared. Henry quickly hugged the screaming girl, shielding her with his body to give her a sense of security. But Henry didn't need to do this, as Katie had already stepped out of the room with a tiger's gait. Charlize's scream wasn't genuine fear, but merely an instinctive reaction. But being comforted, and seeing the tiger leave, not only did her rationality return, but her thoughts also became clearer. Looking at the man holding her, Charlize Theron, her expression regaining its composure, asked, "Is that a tiger?" She then recalled the indescribable expressions on her landlord and roommates' faces when they mentioned Henry. If they'd known their neighbors had a tiger, they'd just look apprehensive. It's fair to say everyone's nerves were remarkably resilient, they didn't collapse. The girl relaxed and regained her composure, but Henry, still holding her, said, "That's Katie the tabby, my adorable little kitty. Look. Hello, Katie." The tiger turned its head, no 3 smiles sealed the marriage, just a roar. Hungry, Charlize wasn't deaf, of course she knew the difference between a meow and a tiger's roar. She stared at Henry with an awkward gaze, forcing the man holding her to laugh awkwardly. "It's time for dinner. I'm going to go get Katie's dinner, or I'll become her dinner. Then you can stay for dinner too." "Oh, don't worry, Katie. She won't bite, I'll stop her." Charlize wanted to remind this man how many flaws he'd slipped into that short sentence. Had she counted? After kissing Charlize's delicate cheek, Henry got out of bed, dressed, and prepared dinner. It was then that Charlize Theron began to realize her situation. It wasn't just about being in someone else's house, or just about having spent a wild afternoon. There was more to it than that, about the future. All the realities washed over her, yet she didn't feel the dejection or sadness she'd imagined. Perhaps she'd found a reliable support, or perhaps she'd resolved that if this support proved unreliable, she'd return to her farm in South Africa to spend the rest of her life. Something had to come to an end. She gathered her clothes from the bedside and put them on one by one. Recalling her unprecedented afternoon experience, Charlize blushed, but quickly calmed down. She wondered if escaping one man's grasp only to immediately throw herself into the arms of another was normal. Was it even a bit too rash? There was no answer to such questions. But Charlize Theron wasn't one to hesitate. Things were done, and at most, she reflected on them, trying to avoid repeating them. As for the current situation, Henry bypassed her and led her to terminate the contract with John Crosby. Charlize needed to know what this man was thinking before she could make the next decision. Chapter 297: A Unique Dinner. After getting dressed and exiting her bedroom, Charlize Theron gazed upon this unusual house with a look of amazement. The most striking feature was the unevenly spaced steel platforms erected against the walls. Their shapes were not uniform, their only similarity being the perfectly rounded, smooth edges that presented no sign of brunt. A sofa sat in the center of the living room. Considering the spatial placement, it was an odd choice. Aside from the kitchen, which was fully furnished, the walls were lined with oddly shaped machines, few of which Charlize could identify. Only a record player and a CRT screen similar to television were recognizable. However, 7 or 8 speakers, large and small, appeared to be audio equipment and were mounted in the corners of the ceiling. The speakers were all pointed at the same spot, where the sofa was, and all were positioned at the same distance from the sofa. The tiger, known as Tabby Kitty, was eating from a metal bowl. The smacking sounds of its bites were particularly frightening. It was just surprising that Charlize was not very nervous. At least compared to the situation in the morning when she was surrounded by a group of men, this tiger was much cuter. Henry, who was busy in the kitchen, saw the girl in the room come out, and immediately reminded her, "Charlize, you don't have anything you don't want to eat. I'll just stir-fry a few dishes and it will be ready in a moment. Also, don't get close to Katie when she is eating. If you want to pet a cat, wait until she finishes her meal. Although this little guy is not very clingy, he has a very good temper. Damn it, you Kryptonian biped, how can I have a bad temper?" The tiger wanted to yell, but he was still concentrating on eating, and magnanimously forgave the Kryptonian who couldn't speak. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Although she really wanted to pet the tiger, Charlize followed Henry's advice and did not approach the animal while it was eating. Instead, she walked around the tiger and came to the kitchen. As for her cooking skills, she was still at the level of not being able to kill people, and she had never asked her mother for advice. Compared with the stir-fry skills of the man in front of her, who was like a restaurant chef, Charlize never thought of exposing his shortcomings. "Please help put the plates and cutlery where you want to eat. There are drinks in the refrigerator. Take out what you want to drink." There was no place in the room that looked like a dining table, so Charlize placed the plates and cutlery on the low table in front of the sofa. As for the drinks in the refrigerator, there were juice, milk, ice water and bitter beer. Charlize had tried that brand of beer before because it was really cheap. But after trying it once, she vowed not to drink it a second time. Although most beers brewed with hops are bitter, the bitterness varies in degree, and the taste in the throat is also different. However, compared with these beers advertised as bitter, the taste is really incomparable. The bitterness of these beers is really bitter, the kind that will make your face wrinkle after taking a sip. So Charlize still took out the ice water and placed it on the low table in front of the sofa. This was also Henry's negligence. He didn't think there would be any guests in his house, and he was a person who could not get drunk, so he didn't prepare many types of alcohol. Because if you don't get drunk, drinking is meaningless. There's not a single bottle of common whiskey, red wine, etc. The bitter beer in the refrigerator is just a cheap substitute for bottled water. The only exception was the rice wine in the kitchen. It was for cooking, not drinking. Actually, there was another unexpected development. The lack of a wine cabinet, or the overflowing beer fridge, gave Charlize Theron a new fondness for him. After all, no one likes an alcoholic, especially one with a bad past. To her, men who drink heavily are often associated with frightening violence and irrational behavior. No matter how kind a man may appear in normal times, once intoxicated or under certain stressful circumstances, they can become violent. While this isn't a guarantee, men who don't drink are far more trustworthy than those who do. This was Charlize Theron's assessment. Henry prepared dinner, tomato pasta, braised fish, and a plate of scrambled eggs with chives. The key point was that the chives were not chopped, but cut into pieces. It was a taste from a distant memory. Once dinner was ready, it was served to the low table where Charlize had arranged the dishes. "Come, try it. If it doesn't suit your taste, I'll prepare other dishes." In the 1990s, Chinese food wasn't that popular in the United States. Or rather, it hadn't yet entered most white households. Even chopsticks were not something many people could use properly. This wasn't the environment 30 years later. So Charlize still used a knife and fork, while Henry brought him an extra pair of chopsticks. Looking at the dishes served, The tomato spaghetti was still within Charlize's comprehension, but the braised fish and scrambled eggs with chives were not. She had probably seen the former on other occasions, but had never eaten it. She hadn't eaten the latter either, but she could still recognize the ingredients at a glance. It was just that the taste of chives was quite strong, and Charlize didn't dare to say whether she could get used to it. Encouraged by Henry, she picked up the fork. First, she scraped off a piece of fish and put it into her mouth. The strong taste of the braised fish, coupled with the freshness of the fish, instantly captured Charlize's taste buds. It was as if nothing else mattered, including the shocking experience that morning. As long as she had this bite to eat, it would be enough. With a braised fish as a start, Charlize mustered up the courage to scoop up a piece of scrambled eggs with chives with a spoon and eat that as well. While not as spectacular as the braised fish, the unique flavor was not unpleasant. Without Henry's urging, Charlize devoured her dinner with knife, fork, and spoon flying. After the day's troubles, how could she possibly have a peaceful lunch? And then there was another unspeakable battle in the afternoon. She was starving, so she didn't even bother eating. Henry didn't rush after Charlize. Instead, he went to the record player and put on Johann Pachelbel's canon, performed by the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. This is the most famous canon, originally played by 3 violins with accompaniment by harpsichord, cello, and lute. The vinyl record featured a symphonic arrangement, performed by a world-renowned symphony orchestra. The music wasn't turned up too loud, but almost the moment it started, Charlize felt as if she were enjoying a live performance in a concert hall. This made Charlize understand why the sofa was placed there. Because it was truly the best place in the house to listen to music. Henry wasn't the only one who enjoyed music. After finishing dinner, Katie also ran over to the low table to see what she could eat. Charlize would be lying if she said she wasn't impressed by such a large tiger approaching. But Henry gently touched the back of Katie's neck and said, "If you want to pet it, scratch its chin, head, or back. Avoid its feet, belly, or tail. It'll get angry. Oh, and don't pull its whiskers, really, give it a try, it won't hurt." Charlize therein tickled the tiger's chin, making Katie's eyes squint with delight, looking incredibly adorable. Seeing the tiger's expression like that made the brave girl feel like she had discovered a new world. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298 Future Planning. In this era, pet restaurants hadn't become commonplace in any country, let alone those where tigers could accompany their meals. No one wouldn't worry about whether they were eating while a tiger waited to eat them. Sometimes scratching its chin, sometimes rubbing its head, whatever it was, it made Katie so comfortable that she squinted her eyes and purred strangely. The tiger's head slid closer and closer, practically burrowing into Charlize's arms. Watching the tiger's expression and movements, Henry wanted to curse. "What a jerk, who did you learn this from? How could being petted by a beautiful woman make you feel this good?" Henry nudged Katie's hind legs with his foot and roared, imitating a tiger's voice. "Get out. Don't bother me while I'm eating." Katie glanced back and, with a similar grin, roared, "Eat yours." Then, with a swaying, king of the mountain demeanor, he left the table, where there was nothing for him to eat. Charlize felt a little sorry for her, but then she saw Katie leap onto the metal cat climbing frame, and after a few leaps, she reached the highest point and lay down on her side to rest. This again surprised her speechless. "Hurry up and eat. The food won't taste good if it gets cold." Henry tried to get Charlize's attention back. And he wasn't wrong, braised fish really doesn't serve cold. Even though it was the same dinner, she was now eating rather absent-mindedly. "Are all tigers this agile?" Charlize, having regained her composure, asked Katie her first question. Henry had no choice but to explain, "Tigers aren't like lions. Although they're both cats, their primary habitat is forests. Climbing trees is easy for them, unless the branches are too thin to support their weight, so, you built these racks, to give her more room to exercise. Otherwise, with such a small house, I couldn't let Katie out. If she just eats and doesn't move, she'll turn into a pig." "How do you keep a tiger?" "You can't buy this from a pet store," Charlize asked curiously. "This is a tabby cat, not a tiger." "Who keeps the tiger?" Henry lied openly. Still, he pondered his explanation, replying, "A friend of mine was commissioned to capture a weaned tabby cat. But the client didn't want to keep it anymore, and my friend panicked, not knowing what to do with it. So I took it in to prevent it from being thrown on the street. Henry spoke lightly. The actual process was indeed just as straightforward, lacking only some background information. For example, the incident took place at the Continental Hotel in Los Angeles, and the friend was the hotel manager, Muni Fisher. The client who captured the tiger wasn't done with it, he was dead. It was his family heir who said no, which is why Henry was allowed to keep it. Although the process of raising a tiger was described as so calm, it wasn't an official procedure or a zoo adoption process. Normally, the listener would have a million questions waiting to be asked, but Charlize veered off in tangent to her own question. Since you can take in a tabby cat because someone abandoned it, then, Charlize even made a double quote gesture next to her ear. So, what are you going to do about my situation? Stunned by the sudden change of subject, Henry was momentarily speechless. Seeing this, Charlize continued, you took the initiative to terminate my contract with John without even asking for my opinion. You must have some ideas, right? Or are you just trying to tell me that Hollywood isn't for me and I should just go back to South Africa? Henry put down his chopsticks and took a sip of ice water. Charlize did the same, but as soon as she took the sip, her eyes lit up. What's this? It's delicious. It's surprisingly sweet. Is it water, sister? You're off topic again, Henry explained. I'm just filtering tap water through a homemade filter and then chilling it in the refrigerator. Generally, strange odors in water are caused by chlorine used for disinfection or pesticides and herbicides that have entered the water cycle. There are also heavy metals that are already present in the water or that get picked up as it passes through pipes. These not only add to the taste, but can also accumulate in the body and cause harm if consumed over a long period of time. This is patented German water purification technology that preserves the minerals and beneficial ions in the water. It's much more delicious than simply boiling it or using a machine to make pure water. Incidentally, pure water without any other substances isn't what the human body needs. That's why Henry hadn't considered using this laboratory-grade dihydrogen monoxide. While Henry's homemade water filter isn't as expensive as the German brand, which requires replacement every 4 weeks, it still requires frequent cleaning to maintain its effectiveness. This is really delicious. After pouring herself another glass, Charlize finally came to her senses and remembered what she was doing. Her eyes widened, awaiting Henry's next words. Henry was both infuriated and amused by this careless woman's attitude. But he still spoke his mind. I have to emphasize that as long as you want to stay in Hollywood, you'll have the chance to encounter something like today again, so returning home is indeed an option. If you want to stay, you need to learn how to protect yourself rather than relying on outsiders for protection. Like today, I just happened to get home and heard the message on my answering machine. And then, by sheer luck, I was able to find you. If you don't even have the chance to call, no one knows your situation. No one can protect you except yourself, and often, people don't necessarily use violence to coerce you. They might offer poison wrapped in a sweet, sugary sauce as bait. If you take it willingly, even if I want to help, I can't save you. Reflecting on what happened today, Charlize admitted she had made a number of mistakes. Perhaps the biggest one was trusting John as her agent too much, not questioning his arrangements. Henry continued, if you wish to stay in Hollywood, continue seeking opportunities, and realize your dream of stardom, then let me be your agent. Even though I don't have any film resources, the best I can do is help you run the Screen Actors Guild and be more diligent. But it's still better than John, who can only help you find modeling jobs that end up in Playboy photoshoots, but this is only temporary, until you find a more capable agent. The best I can do is help you stay in the film industry, but if you want to move up, you'll need to find someone more capable to help you. As for acting school, I don't think you need to go. Save the money, work fewer jobs, and I'll teach you how to act. You're a good student, and getting a recommendation from your acting teacher would be an opportunity. But I think right now, you should consider extending your stay in Hollywood rather than taking short-term risks and gambling on unreliable opportunities. Chapter 299 Henry Card Tutorial. Charlize looked at Henry in surprise. You can teach me acting? Have you ever taught anyone? With a smug smile, Henry said, girl, don't look down on me. Although I haven't taught anyone, there are many ways I can help. You just have to let me prepare. So, has anyone ever praised your acting? Everyone who's seen it says it doesn't look like I'm acting. What do you think? Henry put his hands on his hips and tilted his head back proudly. In reality, it was a dark past that was too painful to recall. When he was helping the mutants fight the aliens, who would have thought the Joker was acting? Who wouldn't have thought the Joker was truly insane? But there was no need to say that. Charlize was puzzled. If that's the case, then why don't you continue your career in Hollywood? His initial pride turned to a sigh of resignation. Henry pointed at his face and said, I've asked many agents, and they all said I don't have a photogenic face. If I went to Hollywood, I could stick to supporting roles for 20 years and maybe I could make it. If I wanted the leading man, no production company would be willing to take a chance on me. So, what's my reason for sticking around? I'm not someone who loves acting, and it's the only thing I can do for a living. Did anyone say that to you? Charlize was surprised. Oh, you think I'm handsome? Henry laughed heartily. No, they're right. Compared to Tom Cruise, you're far inferior. After the ups and downs, Henry lowered his head sadly. Okay, I know all that, you don't have to emphasize it, but in some of your best moments, you're still very handsome. My hero. Charlize propped up her cheek and playfully looked at the man with a fluctuating expression. This cheered Henry up again, and he made a shrug, pouting face, and asking for a slap. Charlize slapped Henry's face in disgust, then pushed it away with a smile. Henry grabbed the girl's hand, took a bite, and got back to the point. Anyway, my method is very simple. I just watch movies with actors who have outstanding acting skills and learn their acting techniques, then I'll get a camera and record your performance. We'll then adjust the gap between what you think and what you actually do. We'll figure out how to achieve the same performance as the actors in the film. As an actor, ultimately, your performance in front of the camera determines success. First, make sure you look good on camera and don't feel awkward, then, make sure you act like what you're doing. What do you think of this training method? Charlize couldn't find any fault with Henry's approach. Starting with imitation, gaining experience in a practical way, a far superior approach than reading acting textbooks and memorizing text, isn't it? Acting is an art form, not a field determined solely by knowledge. So Charlize nodded seriously. Even though she didn't say anything, her seriousness was palpable. Henry continued, but it's not just about polishing your acting skills. To be a good actor, you have to work on many other things. You need to read some psychology to understand what behaviors appear in different people, what their subtle movements and expressions mean, and what to focus your attention on. You also need to spend more time reading to understand the context of a character. That way, you can easily act in a way that suits that character. Finally, there's the matter of accent. If possible, you need to train yourself more and learn more accents to suit characters with different personalities and backgrounds. People say British accents are popular, but that's mainly because of the London accent used by the upper class. There's no need to deliberately learn those rural accents in England. There are enough in the US. In the US, the most beautiful accent is the Great Lakes accent. But most people still use the East Coast New York accent, the West Coast Los Angeles accent, or the cowboy accent of agrarian states like Texas. But in this regard, I believe you'll have no problem. Your English is so fluent and standard that it's hard to tell where your accent comes from. If you don't say it, no one would know your native language is Afrikaans. After hearing Henry say so much, Charlize's confidence was actually hit. She hesitantly said, I have so many things to do. So when will I have the chance to really perform? Henry quickly explained, No. What I said is that as long as you want to be an actor, you must constantly improve yourself and work hard. But your acting work must also be carried out at the same time. This is to enrich your resume, accumulate experience, and accumulate your reputation in this industry. These things must be done together. There is no such thing as being well prepared before taking the next step. You may run for dozens of auditions and not get a chance to perform. This is the norm in Hollywood. So you can't wait, start now. If you just wait, the opportunity will fall to someone else. She has to study, go for auditions, and do odd jobs to support herself during this period. Charlize has never thought of giving up those temporary jobs and relying on Henry to support herself. Although the upcoming arrangements will be very busy, there is finally a glimmer of hope for the future, instead of the darkness and uncertainty like before. Charlize took the initiative to extend her hand to Henry. So, from today on, you are my agent. When will we sign the contract? Gently fiddling with the hand that was stretched out in front of him, Henry looked at the beauty in front of him. This matter will not be carried out so quickly. I have to go to the Screen Actors Guild to register for authorization before I can carry out the agent business. Then we can sign the contract, and then help you find a job and negotiate with others. By the way, speaking of this, have you registered as a member of the Screen Actors Guild? Charlize shook her head regretfully. I heard that it costs money. Henry stroked his forehead, full of helplessness. They want money, sure, but it's not a huge sum. What's John thinking? I don't think he ever wanted to push you into acting from the start. Looking at the girl with a complicated expression, Henry said, anyway, come see me tomorrow. We'll go to the Screen Actors Guild together. I'll apply for authorization as an agent, and you'll register as an actor. I'll pay the fees first, and you'll owe them. Being registered with the Screen Actors Guild is crucial for many film crews. Besides providing you with security, it also saves them some trouble. Otherwise, if something goes wrong, you'll have to fight the crew alone to get compensation, which is very troublesome. Crews will also be wary of you asking for exorbitant prices and breaking the rules. So, unless the crew has problems, most people tend to use members of the Screen Actors Guild. Okay, Charlize compromised, accepting Henry's next plan. You've had a lot today. Go to bed early. Get some rest, and tomorrow's a fresh start. But this time, Charlize shook her head. She rolled over and straddled Henry. Looking at the man she held in her arms, she revealed a cunning, vixen-like expression and said, "Round 2, then she began to bite him again. This was a taste of the sweetness, a woman's terrifying nature. Katie, slumped on the cat tree, noticed that the female Twalag had once again dominated the Kryptonian Twalag. In her eyes, the female was superior to the Kryptonian Twalag, and then to her. The implication was that this female was not to be messed with. Katie understood. With a flick of her tail, she closed her eyes and continued to rest. Chapter 300, Mainland Hotel Trip. Charlize Theron's first day back in freedom was filled with tasks. First, Henry had to stealthily get up in the middle of the night, careful not to disturb the exhausted girl. He had to drive the Cadillac back to his rented warehouse in the Los Angeles waterfront. Having previously used his superpowers to save someone, he'd naturally been unable to take care of the car, leaving it parked at the waterfront. Fortunately, a taxi driver showed him the way, making things go smoothly. If he was going to be taking Charlize Theron around today, he had to get the car back early to avoid wasting her time. Then he prepared breakfast and collected Katie's food from the butcher's delivery boy, filling the feeding bowls. The base bowl was for the morning portion, and the reserve bowl was for the lunch portion. That was enough to get rid of the tabby cat, who cried hungry at the appointed time. "Roar, if you dare, let me go out and forage for my own food. I'll bring you a few Twalag cubs." Everything was ready, and then a kiss woke the sleeping beauty. And then Henry was bitten again. Who says only men get excited about this kind of thing? Anyway, after eating after breakfast, Charlize went back to her room to get her ID photo and registered with the Screen Actors Guild. Henry then registered as an agent. After that, the two signed the agency contract on the spot. Then they rushed to Giovanni's photo studio. This portly Italian-American, who ran a photo studio but also sold everything, was one of Henry's personal suppliers. He always had a way of getting some rare products. His skills were truly extraordinary. But what Henry admired most was his photography and developing skills. Don't think developing photos requires any skill. It's more than just developing what you've captured on film. In fact, in an era before computers and Photoshop, developing photos was an opportunity to Photoshop. While it wasn't as good as the beauty enhancement tools of today, which can turn a sow into a beautiful woman, the development technique still accounted for half of the difference between a beautiful or ugly photo. Most photo studios simply follow the standard process and present the results. Giovanni's development, however, can truly enhance the experience. Retouching and color correction are just the basics. Giovanni can also overlay the content of multiple negatives onto a single image, or delete inappropriate content without making it awkward. Henry still needs more practice to achieve this level of skill. So, to take Charlize Theron's audition photos, Henry brought them to Giovanni instead of doing it himself. It's said that Giovanni's studio specializes in ripping off tourists, charging half the price for acquaintances. It's the epitome of a 3-year business that's profitable after 3 years. Henry used his incredible bargaining skills to get the audition photos down to less than 10%, making Charlize Theron a little insecure. Is this still America? Not some third world country? Can you bargain down to a 10% discount? After visiting both places, he was just in time to get Charlize to her job. Henry didn't make any promises, saying he'd fire all the temporary workers and just support him. Financial independence determines a person's ability to face challenges with confidence. What would people think if a new agent, having just been cheated by her previous agent, wanted to take complete control of her life? Therefore, unless Charlize Theron asked for it, Henry wouldn't interfere too much in her life. On the one hand, while their relationship had evolved to boyfriend-girlfriend status, they weren't yet husband and wife, so they should at least allow each other some privacy. After sending Charlize off to work, Henry had a lot to do. The underwater servers in the dock warehouse could be put aside for now. To coach Charlize's acting, he needed to get a camera. But Henry headed to the Continental Hotel first. The surrender mentioned by the man in the suit yesterday had been on his mind. Unfortunately, he couldn't ask the girls at the front desk about it. Hotel secrets were strictly forbidden to be discussed. Any casual chatter would likely lead to his disappearance. Fortunately, Henry saw someone in the hotel cafe who should know about the situation. Charlie Fisher, uncle of hotel manager Mooney Fisher, was also a veteran gunman who had assisted Henry greatly in establishing the Black Clinic. "Charlie, is anyone here?" Henry asked, pointing to an empty seat across from the old gunman. The old gunman, looking at the empty cafe, still offered him a seat. He added, "If you have something you want to know, you know the rules." Without a second thought, Henry placed a gold coin on the table and pushed it out. Charlie called over the waiter and handed the coin to him. "Give this guy a cup of coffee." "What flavor?" "Double espresso." The black waitress took the coin and went to prepare it. Charlie looked at the man who hadn't appeared for a long time and smiled. "I almost thought you died somewhere. You haven't been around for so long." "I've been busy with other things lately," Henry said with a laugh. Then, his expression turned serious and he asked, "Charlie, do you know what paying tribute means?" "You don't know?" Charlie looked surprised. He still took a sip of coffee to moisten his throat before speaking. "Most of the waiters at the mainland hotel are troubled individuals. Ordinary people can live a normal life and don't necessarily have to engage in such shameful activities. They hope the mainland hotel can help them solve their problems, but of course there's a price to pay. It's the amount of gold coins you have to pay to the hotel each month. There's no set quota, it's basically negotiated between you and the manager. It could be a fixed amount or a percentage. If you ever stop paying, the hotel will no longer provide you with shelter. However, this won't be announced publicly, so your trouble won't come immediately. This is like a buffer period, allowing waiters to raise gold coins. You only found out about this today. You haven't discussed this with Mooney, have you?" Henry looked embarrassed. No wonder the FBI or the police kept coming to his door. He'd relied on his super senses to warn and escape those troubles. It seems they're really gone, but Henry could understand the system. It was like a gold coin recycling mechanism. If the server doesn't need the special services provided by the hotel, the gold coins earned by the gunmen will continue to flow into the server's hands and accumulate. Although the gold coins of the Continental Hotel are not currency in the economic sense, there are similarities. That is, money must flow, not stagnate somewhere. The protection fee paid by the server to the hotel is the link that connects the money flow. Henry had previously misunderstood that the Continental Hotel was ineffective. But it turned out that he was ignorant. As for why the manager didn't mention it, Henry was too lazy to think about the intention behind it. It was nothing more than creating an opportunity to show favor, increase bargaining chips, etc. But no one expected that he was a loach. Since the police and the FBI may have bad intentions, it is better to avoid them before encountering them. There is no trouble. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.